a City Councilor at Large and Chair of the Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. We're here for a public hearing on docket number 0818, Land Disposition and Stewardship. I'm joined by my colleagues. First, the sponsor of this hearing order, Councillor Lydia Edwards, as well as our District 2 Councillor Ed Flynn, and at-large, and District 3 Councillor Frank Baker, and at-large Councillor Ayanna Presley. So I'd like to remind everybody that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8 and RCN 82. So if you would please silence your cell phones and other devices, we will proceed. Oh, thank you. We are going to take public testimony throughout the hearing. So we'll start with 5 to 10 minutes of public testimony in the beginning, then proceed to a panel of community advocates and experts, then take a little bit more public testimony, then hear from an administration panel from the City of Boston, and then close out with public testimony as well. So if you would like to testify, if you feel moved at any point, you can sign up at the sign-in sheet by the door and just check the appropriate box. So as we move to public testimony, I would like to invite the advocates panel to be seated here so you can listen and then we can move directly into your comments. The names that I have listed for that panel are Lisa Owens, Barbara Knecht, Lydia Lowe, Tony Hernandez, and Sharon Cho. So feel free to come down and sit in these seats and spilling over, maybe on this side. And before I proceed with our names for public testimony, I would like to give all of my colleagues a chance to make an opening statement if they wish. And we will start with the sponsor, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, and I wanted to thank all of you for coming today to this, what I think is the beginning of a very important conversation about public land and about how it benefits community. We wanted to make sure that when we talk about housing policy, that we all understand that you build a house from the ground up. And so where the land is going, who owns it, who has access to it, is vital to our conversations about housing justice and assuring that we are housing a Boston for all. So with this, we hope to spark several conversations and to also learn from our colleagues in the city and in the administration about how we dispose and acquire land, maintain land, and then also ultimately dispose of that land. And to make sure that that system is actually working for community and how we can involve community even more, not in all three parts, but especially in the receiving end of that land. We wanted to make sure that when it comes to the stewardship and receivership of certain buildings that are abandoned or land that has been forgone, that we also have a voice at that time and that we are able to make sure that we're benefiting in the long-term conversations, not just in short-term meetings for community process. We really do want to make sure that the government continues to be a good government for all, and that we feel that we have access to the very benefits that a lot of other people, maybe with deeper pockets, do. So with that being said, I think this is a positive conversation. This is not one of a back and forth. I just wanted to thank yet again to my former colleagues at DND, but my current colleagues as well, still at DND, who mentored me, who helped me to learn, and I want to thank you for being here today. And I just also want to thank I think we also have representation from the BPDA as well. And to thank them for coming out today. This is, again, the beginning of a good conversation about how we work together to assure permanent affordability and make sure that the community owns more of our future.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu and Councillor Edwards, for your leadership on this important issue. I have the opportunity to represent Chinatown, and I'm there at least 5 or 6 days a week. And I do see some space that's in Chinatown. In my plan, and what I'd love to see, is more affordable housing being built in that community, giving our residents the opportunity to live there. These are hardworking people. Many of them are immigrants. Many of them are elderly, communities of color, low-income families. We do a great job building luxury condos throughout the city, but I also want to see us do an even better job of building affordable housing for people that desperately need it. And people that desperately need it are in my community. We've been hard hit by Airbnb in Chinatown and in other parts of the city. A lot of people have made a lot of money, unfortunately, exploiting people, throwing elderly people out of apartments, jacking up the rent on elderly people, on immigrants. So I want to make sure that we get back to basics in giving our immigrant community a fair shot at housing, making sure that when there is land available, the community is involved at day one, not halfway through the process, in making sure that the process is fair, that our community organizations have the opportunity to work closely with the city, with the state, to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to live in the city, especially people that don't have the financial means to do so. And that's where I'm coming from on this issue. And again, I want to say thank you to my colleagues for their strong leadership on this issue, not just now, but for many years. And I'm proud to work with my colleagues on this issue, but more importantly, I'm proud of the community I represent, and I'll continue to work hard and fight hard for the immigrant community that I represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I want to note that we're also joined by District 6 City Councillor Matt O'Malley. And now, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for chairing, and also thank you, Councillor Edwards, for this thoughtful hearing order. And I like when you said this is a positive conversation, because I think we are heading in the right direction with D&D leadership over there, and there's been some really positive steps, one being the Neighborhood Housing Initiative, which provides real housing to people and you know, potential generational wealth to build on with that type of housing that is built in that program. That's one of my favorites. So thank you for the hearing order, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Presley.
I too just want to commend the maker, not only for this hearing order, but for her laser focus and her leadership in this space, and that she has always brought a cooperative and collaborative spirit to this, and also an innovative approach to what is the issue for our city. What I love about this discussion is that it is about actualizing something that we talk about a lot, and that is stewardship and community. And community, being stewards and having a stakehold, should not be in the figurative. It's not a metaphor. It should be literal, and it should be put into practice. And I can't think of no better partnership or opportunity for us to do that than when we're talking about public land disposition, to address what is the #1 call for every single one of our offices, and that is how to preserve existing affordable housing, how to grow that housing stock, and to ensure that the diversity that we tout and we celebrate for the city of Boston is preserved. And that has everything to do with our housing stock and making sure that everyone, pun intended, has a right to the city. So I want to say thank you to all the advocates and those who have been a part of the coalition. We've been following your lead on these issues for a long time. Look forward to your partnership. And again, thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Presley. I want to also recognize that Councillor Asabi George, one of our at-large councillors, is here. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Very briefly wanted to commend the lead sponsor, the maker, the good district councillor from District 1, for her leadership. Obviously, everything we can do to grow our affordable housing opportunities, we ought to be doing, we ought to be working together. And I would also just add, through the course of this hearing and in subsequent work with you, Madam Chair, and with the lead sponsor, to include the conversation about really advancing net zero construction on land disposition and working with the city. I know it's something you both feel passionately about, as do I, as does everybody here. So thank you both.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councillor Edwards for calling for this hearing order. I'll just say ditto, 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 and probably another ditto in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Again, we'll start with public testimony and with the first three names, Harry Smith, Andrea Patton, and Kanan Thiruvengadam. Not Andrea? Okay, so Harry and Kanan, feel free to use either of these podiums at the edge here, and please introduce yourself with your name, your address and affiliation, and kindly respect a 2-minute limit as we'll need to keep the hearing going. Is Harry here and wanting to testify? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. I must have the wrong sheet. Okay, well, Kanan, it's all yours.
I wasn't expecting to be the first one, but thank you for calling for this hearing. I'm really glad that we're having this discussion, and a positive one at that. I'm just going to give some concrete examples as to how one land disposition has been done and how the community has benefited from that, because we're here talking about preserving diversity and growing the community and giving the community a right and to be a stakeholder, not just metaphorically, but also literally. So that is the small piece of land that D&D owned in East Boston, which it's now in the process of giving over to a nonprofit called Eastie Farm, which I'm the director of. And this is open space, and I know land can be used in many ways, and housing is, we are in a housing crisis, and when we develop, as Councillor O'Malley said, we should keep in mind that we're also in a climate crisis, and therefore net zero building has to be at a top of a priority. Maybe we should be thinking outside the box and thinking about maybe tiny houses and things like that, how we can build houses that are more in line with the future 21st century kind of housing. That said, I'm also here to highlight the need for open spaces. They are literally there for people to give some breathing room when we're developing everywhere. Right. And the small piece of land doesn't take away a whole lot of space, but it gives back a whole lot. People come to get together, to meet each other, and to grow the community in this small piece. It grows food, and it's green, and it's a happy space where schools come, kids come, play with the worms and whatnot, so it's all nice. But that all is sort of a front for growing community, which this little piece of land has been very, very successful at. And while it's serving that purpose, it's also an informal learning space for what people can do with rainwater conservation, groundwater recharging, waste management. We do a composting facility where people bring food scraps to, and we show them exactly how to do it so it's not gross and it doesn't invite critters. And it's one way you can learn waste management, and both schools and neighbors have benefited from that. This has led to a lot of behavior change, which is hard to implement with kids, let alone adults. So this has been a very successful space. In that sense, these are some concrete uses land can be put to. Open space is, as I said, breathing room and a learning space. We should try to preserve at least some of that. And to the extent that we can sprinkle that around the city, that would be good. And this doesn't have to be one large space. It can be small spaces that can make a lot of difference. I'll reiterate the point I made about housing. We recognize in East Boston, as much as anywhere else, that we are in a crisis mode for housing, and we see people being displaced on a regular basis. So appreciate more affordable housing, but we can also keep in mind how we can build 21st century energy efficient housing. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the final two we'll take, if they're interested in testifying, are Wayne Ye and April Tang.
I think the two names after me are not testifying, but I'll go ahead. My name is Wayne Ye. I'm a resident of Jamaica Plain, but I'm here representing the Chinese Progressive Association, which is a 21-year-old grassroots community organization with over 1,200 members in the greater Boston area. We're based in Chinatown, where we have seen rapid gentrification of our neighborhood, aided by the selling or leasing of city-owned land to build hotels and luxury high-rises. We believe that public land should only be used for public good. Development in a neighborhood, particularly on public land, should follow the priorities of its residents and not the needs of those who are rich. The 2010 Chinatown Master Plan, created by a community-led process, identified 4 anchor areas to stabilize the future of our Chinatown. And now the majority of the anchor areas are occupied by luxury housing. It's imperative that the few parcels of public land that are left in Chinatown, namely Parcel 12, Parcel R1, and Parcel A, are developed for and by the community. In order to adequately address the displacement in Chinatown and stabilize Chinatown in the long haul, we believe that when disposing public land, we must uphold the following principles. First, that the entities with the highest level of community control and ownership, such as community land trusts, where residents' voices hold the most weight, have a stewardship role on public land. Second, that housing is the biggest need in our Chinatown, that if housing is developed on public parcels, at least 50% needs to be affordable to existing working families in the neighborhood. And finally, the request for proposal process to dispose of public land must reflect the input of the affected neighborhoods and Boston residents after a well-publicized community process. Putting public land back in the hands of the public, along with policies that protect tenants and resources for affordable housing, will ensure that Chinatown remains Chinatown. Preserving neighborhoods like Chinatown will ensure the vibrancy of all of Boston. And I have copies of our testimony to submit to.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Cora, for grabbing those. And so the final person we'll take on this round of public testimony is Michael. Wayne, I think, suggested that April and Carolyn may not be interested. Okay, so we'll move to Michael Kane as the final person, if Michael's interested.
Councillor, after the next testimony, we also have two more that didn't get a chance to sign up as well.
Okay, we'll do the next round after
Okay.
the panel goes. Thank you, Wayne.
Hi, thank you, Councillor. I'm Michael Kane. I work at the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, but today I wanted to mention, talk a little about the South End Housing Initiative negotiations, which we won in the mid-1980s, following the construction of Tent City on publicly owned BRA land. And there was a 13-year struggle there, but we ended up with 75% low and moderate income housing, 42% very low income, 30% moderate below 80% of the median. The South End Housing Initiative was in response to a BRA proposal from Peter Dreyer to build only 35% low and moderate income housing on the remaining BRA land parcels. There was a community protest to that, and out of that came a process which recommended 1/3 low, 1/3 moderate, 1/3 market, with the low and moderate minimums. And as a result of that, we were able to get Mayor Flynn to support that, and Stephen Coyle after a community campaign. And 300 units of low and moderate income housing were built on five parcels in the late 80s. So that set a precedent. The BRA did a very interesting report, which is relevant today. And they analyzed what it would take. The idea was to use the market rents to subsidize the moderate income units, but in each case there was a gap, which the BRA report actually measured how much money it would take. And we shared that report with the Walsh administration when they came in. And recently, the DND actually has proposed something very similar to that for the remaining parcels in Roxbury, for 1/3 low, 1/3 moderate, 1/3 market, below 80% for I believe it was, for the moderate. That is the Senhai formula, but I want to emphasize that Senhai, those were minimums, not maximums. And in the case of Roxbury today, there have already been 1,000 units of market housing built, exclusively market. So you need to take that into account, what the existing market housing development has been in a particular community. But the Senhai formula could serve as an ordinance, perhaps, as a mandatory minimum for all vacant land. And the land should be held off the market until a community-based organization, a nonprofit preferably, can assemble the resources to build housing that the community really needs. And I know there's a variety of proposals which we support to have mandatory minimums for low and moderate income, but we've shown in the South End that you can have 2/3 low and moderate with some additional subsidies, judicious subsidies, to make it feasible. So that is a model that I think can work today in pretty much any neighborhood where the market rents are high enough to subsidize moderate income.
Thank you very much. We'll move now to our panel in any order. I don't know if Tony or Sharon or we can start in the middle, but please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and then you can feel free to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. My name is Sharon Cho. I'm the coordinator for the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, which is a part of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. As we all know, the high cost of land and housing, which has only been intensified by the growth of luxury and market rate housing, is worsening Boston's affordable housing and displacement crisis. And while we continue to build more units to add to our housing portfolio, working class residents continue to be housing burdened, with 1 in 5 Boston residents paying 50% or more of their income on housing. And given this intense real estate pressure, community organizations and nonprofit developers who want to develop more affordable housing simply can't compete with the capital of corporate investors. And we all know that development alone will not solve this displacement crisis. Working class residents who face the threat of displacement know that building units that are unaffordable to them will not stabilize their precarious housing situation. We must also protect and expand affordable housing, and we must ensure that communities have a say in what and for whom development is built. We have to ensure that precious public land is used to stabilize our neighborhoods and to benefit our communities. And so the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network is here to ask that when disposing of publicly owned land, that public agencies first consider permanently affordable housing or local community-based economic development to stabilize Boston's neighborhood, and that there be a priority for public land disposition that coheres to a community-driven plan that offers the longest term of affordability and the highest level of community ownership and control. And we ask that community input to determine specific requests for proposals reflect the input of those who are most impacted. And community land trusts are uniquely positioned in that they both preserve long-term affordability and they ensure community stewardship of land. And land trusts grew out of the struggle of communities to take control of land and their own futures, with the understanding that the true value of land doesn't come from the speculative market. They come from what the community collectively invests in it. And land trusts are not a new idea. The City of Boston has worked with the D&I Land Trust for several decades with great success. And in addition to the D&I Land Trust in Roxbury, there are now land trusts in Boston's Chinatown, in the neighborhood of Dorchester, Mattapan, Highland Park, and our neighboring city of Chelsea. Land trusts have proven to protect against gentrification and displacement in hot markets and against foreclosures in the economic downturn. And during the most recent foreclosure crisis, land trusts locally and nationally had a foreclosure rate of less than 1%. And land trusts ensure that affordability is in perpetuity so that public resources benefit not just one household, but generations of Boston residents. Now, we all know that land is limited and it's a valuable resource. And given the severity of the displacement crisis, we have to use every tool at our disposal to protect people from displacement. And as you all mentioned, what we're asking today is already aligned with the goals of the city and our public agencies, whose charge is to protect and further the interest of the public. And continued housing growth without protections for affordability will only worsen displacement. So we ask that you take action to protect the interest of the public by ensuring that precious public land be used to stabilize our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Lydia?
Thank you. My name is Lydia Lowe. I'm director of the Chinatown Community Land Trust. And I want to, again, also thank you all for this hearing, which I think is really important. With displacement at the level that we have in Boston, we really have to consider public land as a very precious resource. and be very conscious about how we designate and utilize it. I think there are important different aspects to this conversation. I think that the city has relatively more developed processes and systems around pipeline management and site-specific designation procedures. And I think, I can say that in Chinatown, we've had very positive relationships with the city around prioritizing public land for affordable housing, particularly in the recent period. We haven't always had that positive relationship. But we think that more can be done to make this uniform across the city, and to develop more ongoing policies, and policies that really push the envelope more about what we can do with our public land. We think it's also important to look at cross-agency coordination and collaboration, because sometimes there are a lot of different agencies in the city involved with public land, and they're not always doing the same thing. I want to emphasize something that Sharon spoke to, which is the important role of community land trusts in this conversation. And we would actually welcome the opportunity in the future to do a more in-depth informational session for the City Council about community land trusts, which we think are an important innovation for the city. Community land trusts play an important role in terms of permanently removing land from the private market and permanently preserving affordability. And this is particularly important in situations where we're not relying on financing alone to provide that affordability, and that we're providing for terms of 99 years. That is renewable. The other important thing about community land trusts is that it's a very strong mechanism for community control by residents. And community land trusts are specifically set up with that as their primary mission, so that community land trusts generally have boards that are elected by diverse sectors of the community, particularly involving residents, both renters and owners, small business owners, or other important stakeholders in the community, for the sole purpose of exercising that kind of collective ownership and control. This is a unique role that's distinct from other entities, even in the nonprofit community. Another important role of community land trusts is the role of ongoing stewardship. And again, because of that unique structure and mission, community land trusts can be very important stewards to ensure that affordability agreements and other types of deed restrictions are really adhered to, and that there are constantly neighborhood eyes on that to make sure that it happens, as well as community-based support to help first-time home buyers, understand and learn about what it means to own a home. In Chinatown, we are a relatively new organization, started in 2015, but we are gradually developing our role in these different areas. And publicly owned land is one of the critical concerns of our land trust. In Chinatown, public land includes BPDA-owned land as well as MassDOT. And we have had a long-time goal for many years of at least 50% affordability on any public land. But we found that there are unique roles that the land trust can also play, in addition to continuing to advocate for that type of commitment to permanent affordability. It can include ensuring permanent public access to promised community space, and an ongoing community voice after designation as a project moves forward. That's really important because we have a depth of experience in the community of being promised very beautiful community spaces and community rooms by both for-profit and nonprofit developers, only to see them gated and privatized later. So one of the things we have been advocating in an upcoming public parcel development is that the Community Land Trust and the Friends of the Chinatown Library own easements to ensure public access to promised spaces in the upcoming proposal. Stewardship of community spaces can also extend to important things like amenities like the Reggie Wong Park, which is Chinatown's primary open recreational space, where we are trying to ensure that there are some interim improvements that will fulfill the community's master plan to that public land, which is actually state-owned land that will be up for development in the future, and therefore a fairly complex situation. But this is the type of role that a community land trust can also play. And finally, we think that it's important for us to look at long-term stewardship of affordable units, and that we should consider this also when we look at our inclusionary development policy. I think that it's important for us in this conversation to learn from what some other cities across the country are doing, and also to recognize that this is kind of pioneering. That there's a lot of room for trying new things and setting new standards for the use of public land. We can look at the city of Santa Fe, where the city is looking at the possible designation of 64 acres of public land, and in conversations with the community land trust there about where that may be a possibility. Newark, New Jersey, and Los Angeles have been moving smaller properties to community land trusts. In other cities, they're taking a corridor approach, which I know has been under discussion here as well, in looking at transit-oriented development, not just in terms of the traditional smart growth that focuses on density, but looking at how do we actually stabilize those neighborhoods. In Los Angeles, they have a 30% affordability requirement for transit-oriented development along that corridor. And in Seattle, they have an 80%, they have a policy of 80% of affordability at 80% of our area median income or below. There are other cities that are pioneering new partnerships with the community. In Philadelphia, the city has partnered with the Association of Puerto Ricans on the March to be contracted to unfold the community planning process in a way that's that only a community-based organization can do. So I just offer these as some things for us to think about as we move forward this conversation, and we look forward to continuing to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Lisa?
Good afternoon. I just want to add my voice thanking all of the councilors for sponsoring this hearing. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Wu, and Councillor Flynn. My name is Lisa Owens, and I am a board member of the Coalition of Occupied Homes in Foreclosure, and I'm also a resident of East Boston. The Coalition of Occupied Homes in Foreclosure, we are in the process of transitioning. We're changing our name to the Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust, and that will be official in less than a month. And our organization is a member of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network. So as members of the network, we are in full support of the recommendations that both Sharon and Lydia have just shared. I'm here to talk a little bit more about why we should prioritize community land trusts on public land. In short, by really giving you a snapshot of what's possible, I'm going to do that by talking a little bit about COHIF. So in short, community land trusts stabilize residents and communities, promote permanent affordability, and increase civic engagement and resident leadership. So let me tell you a little bit about how we at COHIF got started. So our mission is to stop displacement and stabilize neighborhoods and families in the city of Boston by stewarding a community-controlled land trust, by working with residents and organizations to purchase foreclosed and distressed properties, and advocate for community control over land and housing. We began as a unique and odd coalition of over 25 housing and legal and community groups and residents, all focused on keeping homeowners in their homes during the foreclosure crisis. Our aim at that time was to demonstrate how community organizing and cross-sector partnerships could keep people in their homes by advocating for policy and systems change. As a result of our network and our relationships together, we were actually able to purchase and rehab 6 scattered site, formerly bank and lender-owned foreclosed occupied properties for a total of 15 homes preserved. It's important to note that it was the leadership and perseverance of the families, both tenants and homeowners together, backed up by City Life's solid community organizing and the expert legal defense of Greater Boston Legal Aid, Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, and the Legal Services Center, that won control of these properties. Through their efforts, the current COHIF resident leaders and now board members have demonstrated a deep commitment to each other, to their neighborhood, and to the city. Today, as the Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust, we act in partnership with anti-displacement resident leaders and organizations to steward the 15 properties and build resident governance and leadership. We hope to continue to work with our partners, including those at the city's Department of Neighborhood Development, to acquire distressed properties, both occupied and vacant, and place them on the land trust. In this way, we hope to create or preserve more community-controlled, permanently affordable housing in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by the displacement crisis. And although we are a themed citywide land trust, our priority area is the Fairmount Corridor. We are currently stewarding 15 properties in Dorchester, and we are working with our partners to identify additional bank-owned foreclosed properties along the Fairmount Corridor for purchase and placement onto the land trust. And it's important, we think, to focus on the Fairmount Corridor for many of the reasons that Lydia just mentioned. And particularly along the Fairmount Corridor, because of the transit improvements, the need for targeted anti-displacement strategies is imperative, and it's timely. So along the Fairmount Corridor line, which runs through Boston's largest neighborhoods of color, through working with folks both at D&D and the BRA, we learned that an astounding 83% of residents in the corridor are right now at risk of displacement. And while we know that there needs to be a number of complementary anti-displacement strategies to stabilize these residents at risk of displacement, we believe that the expansion of a community land trust in this area is one important part of this strategy. We believe that creating criteria regarding the disposition of public land that prioritizes the highest level of community control with mechanisms for maintaining permanent, real affordability will be key to stabilizing the working class communities that are most at risk of displacement along the corridor. We have seen success on a small scale of using the land trust model to stop displacement, increase resident engagement and leadership, and create permanent solutions for housing affordability. We highly encourage the council and the city administration to see the land trust model as a tool for addressing two crises, both the displacement crisis and the affordability crisis, and prioritize the land trust model when deciding on disposition of public land. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Barbara?
Good afternoon. I represent the Urban Farming Institute of Boston, so we're going to take a little walk away from housing for a minute. We are a founding member also of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network. We develop farms, and we're about 5 years old, and most of you probably know that urban farms were just created as an as-of-right use in the Boston zoning code only in the end of 2013. And the development of urban farms over these years is a perfect example of the bottom-up neighborhood priority, because we never develop farms that the neighborhood has not asked us to develop, or we have thoroughly vetted it through a neighborhood. And we have been working with the city very successfully with D&D to kind of bring this process to develop urban farms into a system. But I want to emphasize the fact that this kind of process that the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network has proposed is exactly the kind of thing that has been a success for us. The process for land disposition that prioritizes local decisions about local land use and long-term affordability and local economic development. Boston, like many cities, is facing a crisis, an inadequate supply of affordable housing. Housing is the fabric and foundation of healthy urban neighborhoods. Stable housing means stable residents who build communities of attachment around common interests and priorities, who build the social infrastructure to thrive, and who contribute economically and socially to the entire city. But healthy neighborhoods are more than housing. Healthy neighborhoods support daily and recurring human needs with stores and services, recreation and entertainment. Less time traveling elsewhere means more time building local relationships. More money circulating within a neighborhood builds stability and permanence. The Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network advocates for the use of public land to stabilize and support neighborhoods. Urban farms are a relatively new land use, created as of right in the 2013 Article 89 amendment to the city's zoning code. This land use change came about because of local activism to legalize this land use. It came about because there are many parcels suitable for small-scale farming that would otherwise go undeveloped. It came about because local residents identified the value of this new use to local food access and economic development. This is a case study in the wisdom of local land control. Community land trusts answer local needs. They are a proven method for protecting long-term affordability in housing and preserving open space uses such as urban farming. Community land trusts can be vehicles for local land use planning, having demonstrated how they promote neighborhood stability and community control. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Tony?
Hi, councilors. Thank you for making the time to hear what we have to say today and for bringing the session together. We do appreciate it. My name's Tony Hernandez. I humbly serve as director for Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, a subsidiary of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Part of the goal today is to embed the words community land trust in your heads, if you haven't heard the word enough from my colleagues. And I just want to share some of our history so that, you know, we've put out verbiage about what we'd like to see and how we think the community land trust model can be a good vehicle for that. In our history, we've existed for over 30 years. And it was during a time when the Dudley neighborhood was very underinvested. And thanks to the administration at the time of Mayor Flynn, we were able to gain support and get control of land in the immediate neighborhood. And, you know, fast forwarding 30 years later and going through this community land trust model process and involving the residents, the small businesses, and community members, you know, today I represent a portfolio that has 227 units of affordable housing. 96 of that 227 are single and duplex family homes. The remainder of that number are made up of affordable rental units. We have a 10,000 square foot greenhouse on our land trust. We have a 1.5 acre farm amongst a number of other farms in association with partners like the Urban Farming Institute. And we just recently had the opportunity to buy a commercial building in the Upham's Corner area, a process that will undergo the same community process and offer the transparency from A to Z in how that building will be used and what it will become in its future. All of that spans over 30 acres in our immediate area. Dudley Neighbors Incorporated is a member of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network. Our goal is to figure out how to replicate the model. It's, you know, we've had this specific equation that has worked in our neighborhood. It's not the, you know, one-size-fits-all approach. You just have to flip a few variables in the equation, but the outcome is the same. And it's that, you know, if we can get the land disposition control, it'll allow the residents to control the process. You know, we've for years been sharing our best practices with, you know, with my colleagues. and as well as sharing the failures and understanding, sometimes you require failure in order to reach the successes. And so I'm here today to represent that history and to, ask that, and implore the powers to be to really help us get control of the land. We thank partners like the Department of Neighborhood Development. Over the years, they've been key allies in helping us attain the land and figuring out how to find funding sources so that we can get developers interested in wanting to build affordable homes on these sites, and how to, arm wrestle with them at the negotiation table so that they can make the money that they're looking to make, but to also benefit the community. And as mentioned earlier, with all the properties that we develop on the land trust, we strike a 99-year ground lease. And it gives these families the opportunity to pass these homes down to their family members or to sell it and bless another family with first-time home ownership. And once that 99-year clock runs out, we just hit the reset button. And so the opportunity to keep that control is something that has prevented the teeth of gentrification that are kind of surrounding our immediate neighborhood now from really creeping in, and having that authority over the land. And I'm a true believer that having the right folks at the table is a key to the success of this. And as I mentioned earlier, DND has been a key ally in helping us through this, having the right folks like attorneys and the banks. We've done sessions with a number of banks to help them understand what community land trusts are about, giving them that CLT 101. We'd love to have the opportunity to do it with, council members and to help you guys understand the benefits of what the community land trust model can bring to the city of Boston, and to create a process of transparency that is going to benefit the community, for the community, by the community, is what we ultimately go for. And one of the models that is the foundation of the practice that I try to move forward today in the stewardship of the portfolio that I manage is that if I veer away from the statement of development without displacement, then I'm not doing my job. And the goal is to keep folks that want to stay in the neighborhood, give them an opportunity to remain, and give folks who are looking for that opportunity to come. So I thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you to all of our panelists. We'll move into questions and conversation with councilors, starting with Councillor Lydia Edwards.
Thank you all for coming here today. I have mostly broad questions, but I do have some specifics. So I'll go to the specific questions real quick. When it comes to, so one of the biggest, and I guess this could go to Lydia, and you cited several examples around the country and then also the growing depth of community land trusts. And I guess you talked about 80% affordability in one of them, with 80% the AMI or below. And so what I guess I'd love to hear more from, because I feel like the narrative that we're going to hear as the city, and I do believe we are all on the same team, but one of the biggest narratives we will hear is that with affordability that high, with 50% that high, it will kill development. You won't be able to build on the land trusts if you have such high percent. I feel like that's a narrative we've heard before, and I think it's a narrative that we will hear. And so with increased affordability rates based off of a localized understanding of income, not necessarily the AMI, what's your response to that, saying that these high percentages are going to kill development? Building, yeah.
So I'm actually not an expert in those policies that I cited, nor am I necessarily,
anyone can answer.
Yeah, nor am I necessarily advocating that particular percentage, setup. But I think that, there's room for us to continue to push the envelope as far as what we're requiring. I don't, Boston is so hot right now that developers, are all trying to come here. We already have, even just around us, cities that have increased their inclusionary development requirements that are higher than Boston, and it doesn't seem to be slowing them down, such as Cambridge. Again, I'm not a real estate finance expert, but I think, if we look around at, all of the luxury towers that have come to Boston, there are millions and millions of dollars being made. And I just think that, you know, we have the right to demand more of the development community.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I completely agree 100% with what Lydia just said. And I think that we can, there are actually lots of ways to get to the 80%, right? There's both preservation of existing housing, and then there's partnering with our CDC partners, and using the resources that we have available at the city level. So for example, the Acquisition Opportunity Fund, if we're talking about preservation, or CPA money, if we're talking about new construction. But we do have tools at our disposal, and we do have partners to be able to build 100% affordable projects on public land. I think that the low-hanging fruit is actually public land. We have the most control over what we do on public land, and we have more levers at our control. So I would say, you know, at least on public land, this is sort of, this is the lowest hanging fruit that the city's going to get.
And could possibly reduce, if the acquisition costs of the land are free or very little, maybe the construction costs would also follow.
That's absolutely right.
Right?
That's right.
Sorry, Tony? You could
That's
just,
right. Yeah, and one of the things that have been beneficial for us in building housing on our land trust in Dudley is, you know, getting subsidy dollars to support the construction. And I don't know of other scenarios where an organization can stretch the subsidy dollars as long as we're able to through our model, because we serve as kind of a third leg on a stool by helping these homeowners be the best homeowners they can be, and serving as resources to them when they have needs for home improvement. And so it allows a home to last longer in a better way, you know, showing that those subsidy dollars that were invested in the construction will go a lot further than the subsidy dollars potentially on a market rate home that becomes, you know, depreciated over the years, and a homeowner doesn't care to upkeep it anymore. So there are ways to really, you know, chisel the numbers out, and, you know, through the model, having personnel that can be on board to really carry folks through that process.
And this is not so much on the topic of public land, but the question that you asked. I think that we also have to, you know, if we really believe in community-driven planning, we also need to consider that, you know, not every project benefits the city. And, you know, of course, we don't want to, you know, have no development. We're not anti-development, but we can't be so afraid that, you know, that any, you know, of any development, you know, being stalled, you know, is always a bad thing. Because there were some developments that, you know, we wouldn't have mind losing. You know, like the, you know, Millennium Towers that's on the, you know, that's on a publicly owned parcel, you know, which happened you know, under a prior administration. But, you know, that was a sweetheart deal for a piece of public land that, you know, went to build a luxury tower. A lot of it is now owned by foreign investors who don't even live there, and that land is gone. If we had, you know, if we had killed that golden goose, maybe it would still be there for us to do something else with. So
one of the, and I don't know whoever feels more comfortable answering this question, one of the biggest, when I discussed community land trusts, I won't say who, but one of the leaders in the CDC world say, what's their point? We're doing that work. CDCs are already doing that work, and this is just, so you want to break down for me maybe column 1, column 2, CDCs and its commitment, and this is not a critique, this is not a competition, but they feel that, you know, you're just another way of calling what the work they've already done. I'm sure you've heard this. So I just would love for you to educate me about that. CDC's land trust, what's the major differences?
I'll speak about Dudley Neighbors Incorporated. You know, because of our track record, we're built like a CDC. And one of the things that I think is always missing from the conversation is the C and COT, community. And that process of letting the residents guide the process, bringing in local business owners, bringing the actual community members into the process of the actual development, looking through schematics, approving, you know, community benefits. I think that sometimes is missing on the CDC end of things, is the lack of community input and true community process. And that's something that makes us different from a CDC in that it's heavy on the community interaction versus I'm just going to run this process and then let the community know what we built at the end. So those are one of the things that stands out to me in my experience.
Sure. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we actually have a very positive relationship with the Community Development Corporation in our community, and they have, over the years, developed a lot of expertise in getting development done, and including leveraging for-profit development in order to support affordable housing development in Chinatown. But I think what's unique about the Community Land Trust, it is that level of resident ownership and involvement that is unique. And it's not necessarily in opposition to or to counter the role of a community developer. In some cases, I think it may strengthen the community developer, which sometimes is at a disadvantage within a partnership with a for-profit developer to really be able to safeguard the community's needs and vision. By having a community land trust involved, you have that voice at the table, and that community voice that's really focused on community residents, not only on development professionals and people with that, those type of professional skills, but it's through an entity that specifically does work to develop residents' capacity to understand those development trade-offs and concerns and balance them with, with what the community's vision is. I think that also we've been having a conversation with the Asian CDC about the issue of permanently affordable ownership housing, because there's a lot of interest in increasing home ownership in Chinatown, which is a 95% renter community. And with home ownership units, that is a particular role that a community land trust can play, as I had mentioned earlier, because you really have that, in the neighborhood stewardship, of the ownership units. So it's not just that there's a deed restriction, which is on file and can be brought to court if needed, but there's really some, people on the ground who are looking out for that.
I think it's also the opportunity to explore a particular land use. I mean, I think the Urban Farming Institute has had the benefit of the expertise of local residents who wanted this new land use, and I think it would have been a real stretch for a CDC to take on that kind of exploration. So I think that's something that we should think about as we want our neighborhoods to be have more complexity and more risk-taking in terms of thinking about how we're going forward to make good neighborhoods.
Whether we're looking at affordable housing in the smaller row houses, or we're looking at something like Reggie Wong Park, there are particular things that are important to the community as a whole, but which, a lot of CDCs don't have the bandwidth or the resources to pursue, and it's not profitable for them to pursue it. Right. But that's what a community land trust is for.
There's just one more thing. So our land trust actually is a scattered site land trust, and we have properties that are typically 2 and 3 families across, and the vision is across the city, although right now we're in Dorchester, and it would neither be feasible nor profitable for a CDC to have the model that we use, and so we really do act in complement with the CDCs.
Thank you. And so I can save questions for another round.
You're good, Councillor. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Lydia, I was interested in some of your comments, especially on the Millennium Project. It would have been a great opportunity to have more housing, affordable housing, right in our own neighborhood in Chinatown. I also think of the One Dalton building that's going up, I often wonder if the affordable housing units are going to stay right in that neighborhood, right in that community, or not. But when you highlighted the Reggie Wong Park, probably up for development, you know, that's really the only outdoor athletic playground that is used by the Chinese community, and they use it often, playing volleyball, playing sports, families gathering. Imagine giving that property away to a developer to build luxury condos and then having no outdoor space for athletics in the Chinatown community. That's really troubling to me as the District 2 City Councilor. So that's a priority that when we do get rid of a great asset like that, what type of impact does that really have on the community?
Well, I think you said it already. I mean, it's the community's main outdoor recreational space. I do want to be clear that we're not talking about that Reggie Wong Park is not actively under threat at the moment. Mass DOT has pledged that when they put out they call it not an RFP, but an invitation to bid, again, that preservation and improvements to Reggie Wong Park will be part of the invitation to bid. But, you know, of course, I think that there's a difference between that commitment to put it into the invitation to bid and having the community actually at the table to safeguard that permanence. And I think I also want to say about Millennium, yes. And on the other hand, you know, after we did lose that public parcel, which was called Hayward Place before, the community was successful in leveraging some benefits from Millennium Partners, you know, which are now going towards the building of 171 units of all affordable housing on parcel 12, which is one of our public parcels. And that's a project that the Asian CDC is working on with multiple institutional and for-profit partners.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. I think it's important as we follow the Reggie Wong potential that we really get a written confirmation from the state, from Mass DOT, that there is some type of athletic facility for the residents of Chinatown. Could you possibly imagine a neighborhood in the city of Boston that doesn't have any outdoor athletic space for our children to play sports? I can't even think of that. And then Tony, I know you talked about the community process, and sometimes it seems to me that, you know, the community process is there, but it's almost at times just checking the box that, you know, is there really a neighborhood voice in the community process? Is the neighborhood active? Is the neighborhood at the beginning, on day one, or are they brought in at the middle? Are their concerns really heard by people in power? That's what I want to know about the community process. Is the neighborhood voice, is it really heard by the decision makers, or are people just going through the emotions just to check the box and say, yeah, we had a community process and it went well, everyone's working together? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, sir. Yeah, our processes with the community go from the very beginning through to the end, when we have a sustainable development committee that comes together every month. Actually, there's one tonight that I'll be helping facilitate. And what happens is when developers come into the neighborhood or there are potential projects coming down the pipeline for the neighborhood, we ask that representation show up at our meeting to tell us what is going on, what the site is, give us a presentation, to give us a chance to, one, understand what the site is, what they're looking to put up. Our committee members start drilling the developers or the architect or the engineers with questions about how are you handling affordability? What are the community benefits? And so we invite those folks to our meetings, and after they present, we kindly ask them to leave, and we talk about them afterward, and then we'll produce either a letter of support or of not support for the project moving forward, with the following conditions. We heard that you said this, we're not jiving with that. We want to see X, Y, and Z. And that's how we interact with the architects, engineers, or developers, contractors. And then, that can go a number of ways. They can be responsive to it, and we ask them kindly to come back and present again before our committee. And, they're saying, I heard your concerns. These are the things we're looking to do with the project, or these are the things we're not going to do with the project. And then, if we've had folks that have come and said, I'm going to do what I want to do with this site. Well, now you're going to activate the grassroots piece of the community organizing, where we're going to, find ways to protest against your project. And when it comes time for zoning and variances, we're going to fight against that, because we're going to slow the process down and make it hard for you and help you understand that you are in our neighborhood, and we want to see it at the table. So we conduct various meetings in that manner, just looking to hear what's going to happen and to kindly say, we'd like a voice in this matter. And so we do it from the very beginning. We ask folks to come back and present. When construction is happening, we ask for folks to come back and say, how are things going? Are you meeting the marks of the community benefits that we agreed to? We ask for things in writing to establish understandings as the project moves forward. And upon completion, we hold a tight grip on that memorandum of understanding, the written document, to uphold what they said they would do. So we pretty much try to cover from A to Z. And if anything ever happens in the future, what we try to also get in writing is just the opportunity to have a seat at the table and have a voice. That's the big thing.
Well,
I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Lydia, for taking my questions. And as I highlighted in my opening statement, I mentioned the Airbnb, what a terrible impact it had on my community in Chinatown. But having said that, maybe there's an opportunity now to make up for it in terms of building affordable housing in Chinatown. So that's what I want to focus on as we go forward. What type of plans will there be for our immigrant community, for low-income families, making sure that Boston is a city for them? So throughout this process, I'll be looking forward to hearing more about it from you and from the city, about what type of affordable housing we can build for our immigrant community, communities of color, my community in Chinatown and the South End, that desperately, in South Boston, that desperately needs affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony, can you talk a little bit about the land trust? So DSNI has stewardship over it, or are they two separate entities?
Yes, sir. DSNI is the parent organization.
Yeah.
They're the community organizing arm of the organization, and they created DNI to be the stewards of the physical
land trust
of the land, and to when they received the land in the beginning, everybody on board was a community organizer. No one knew how to talk to the engineers, the architects, the contractors. And so this land trust model thing came into play, and they hired folks that could talk the talk with folks. And so that track has gone on for over 30 years now, and the ability to sit at a table and understand how to read floor plans.
Was the initial land city land?
Yes, sir. Initial city land, and at the time, Mayor Flynn responded to a number of local residents that went into his office and said, we want control of the land. And Mayor Flynn allowed for a memorandum of understanding to allow eminent domain over those parcels. And so then, it was a victory in one moment where there were about over 1,300 empty parcels that
And you got, well, not you, but the land trust got all 1,300 parcels right away?
Over time, we had to approach the owners of the empty parcels of land, and we use the eminent domain authority as kind of a poking stick to reach out to the owners and say, hey, this is what we think your land is worth. Here's a check. right? And they would automatically pop their heads up and say, whoa, 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 who are you? And so we would bring them to the table and negotiate those.
So they
those
would stay in
purchases.
their homes, but you would buy the land underneath it if they were in homes?
All the parcels of land were empty parcels. We took over no parcels with existing structures. That was part of the understanding, is only the empty parcels that were in the neighborhood. Today, we're venturing into combing through the neighborhood for foreclosed properties and figuring out a way to fold that into the land trust model, because we think there's an opportunity there.
And then those residents that are in those homes can stay in there. If you bought the land underneath them, then they just pay into the land trust. So when you find an opportunity like the Uplands Corner building, how is that paid for? Is that paid for your portfolio pays for that?
We applied for acquisition funds.
From
through the
D&D?
Through D&D, and we're able to purchase that commercial building. And so the goal now is to go through the community process. We've had a number of community meetings asking folks, what would you like to see happen on this site? So part of the development for that particular building, a non-negotiable variable in the equation is that it must have affordable housing on the site. And so folks have asked me, how much affordable housing are you trying to put here, Tony? I said, I'd love to put 100% affordable housing.
Yeah.
So, we need to crunch numbers and figure out what's doable. But then there's also the main bank space, which has an opportunity for artist space, commercial, retail. And so we've gone to the community and said, what would you like to see happen here? The goal would then be to, I'm in the process of, we hired a consultant to help us put together an RFP. Developers respond. We bring them into our community meetings. I have a steering committee made up of community members that will interview the, potential developers. Ultimately, to hand it off to a developer and hand the cost of the building over to a developer.
Okay, so at that point, the developer comes in and gives you a square foot pricing or whatever will be in this range here. So you're able to deliver the building. This is a theory, and correct me if I'm wrong. You're able to, in theory, deliver the building for less money per square foot. So that is how we are able to have affordability in those units.
That would be part of the goal. The building will hand to a developer. The goal will be to produce affordable units and a visioning process that will come to reality based on what the community wants to see.
Because the developer doesn't necessarily, so the developer is not worried about a percentage of units. That's, you're going to worry about that. So you deal with whoever on the city side to say, okay, we're going to do 60% affordable. They just still give you that price. So they don't have to really worry about that. How do you, on the back end of it, keep it affordable?
So our goal is to try to create the script that we hope they can deliver on. We want X amount of affordable units available on this site, and then once it's handed over to them, we'll be charging them with sharpening the pencils and figuring out how to come as close as possible to that visioning process that we've created through the community process. One of the things with the land trust model is that the building will be handed over to the developer, but the land that the building sits on will remain on the land trust.
So does you're saying the person that builds will continue to operate that building?
They'll continue or hand it off to a different operator, but the land that it sits on will remain in the land trust portfolio, as far as I'm concerned, forever. And so again, having that seat at the table for anything that may come up in the future is part of the leverage that we want to create, because well after I'm gone, the community will still have an opportunity to have influence over what happens on that site.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Salvi George.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Can you tell me, anyone from the panel, how many community land trusts there are in the city of Boston? I think there were some mentions of them, but I'm curious how many there are, where they are.
As of now, counting the Dudley Neighbors Incorporated Land Trust, we have a land trust in Boston's Chinatown. COHIF that Lisa mentioned is becoming the Boston Neighborhood Land Trust. We have a land trust in Highland Park as well. and the Urban Farming Institute, as well as a land trust that's forming in Chelsea, in the city of Chelsea, called Green Roots. And so I think I'm counting 5. Yeah, thank you.
5 in Boston. And,
Or Greater Boston.
and then 6, including Chelsea.
Community organizations that are interested in the land trust model, that there may be future land trust developed as well. For example, Chinatown Community Land Trust currently owns a parcel of land in Dorchester because there is a community organization that organized where residents took control of a sliver parcel to protect as a community walkway, but didn't have a land trust developed there.
Okay. And then there was some comment earlier about some of the community or public space on private development or as part of private development. I couldn't find quickly, I went to search to see if I could find that list of those spaces. I'm curious if anyone has that list.
Spaces where
Community space that's part of, we were referencing you all referenced the, what's that? Yeah, community rooms, public space, open space that's part of a larger development often. It's that set
Yes.
aside that, I think it was actually you, Lydia, I'm not sure
Yeah,
who
it was
mentioned
me.
the sort of the over time, how we lose access and the easement
Yes.
comment.
Well, I can explain what I meant. In Chinatown, there were a number of different, as development happened, there were a number of public spaces and community spaces promised. One of them was actually on Parcel C, where the community demanded a public space that would be accessible not just to the residents, but to everybody in the community. It became the Metropolitan, and although it's technically public during the day hours, it's fenced in, and it really doesn't feel like a public space, and in the evening, it's closed to the public. On Parcel 24, there was similarly a vision of a community room that could be used and a community patio that could be used by the community at large. Those are now only available for use by the community, the residents of that development. Within Tufts University, there was a promised community space. It was supposed to be a community garden that would be great for the neighborhood. It became fenced in, and it's available only to Tufts University medical students, or an occasion for specific community uses with advance arrangement with Tufts University.
So is your suggestion that community land trusts would be the holder of the easement?
So these spaces, I don't think that we have a great chance of going back and reclaiming them,
Then
although
going
we'd love
forward
to.
is a
But
suggestion.
going forward, for example, there is a proposal for a permanent Chinatown library on Parcel 12, but where one of the development partners does plan to do development in front of the library in the future on the Chinatown side of the project. And there's also a very beautiful envisioned public courtyard in the center of the development. So we have proposed that, while these are great visions, that the Friends of the Chinatown Library should own easements to ensure permanent public access and visibility from the Chinatown side of the project for the Chinatown Library, and that the Chinatown Community Land Trust should own an easement to ensure that the promised courtyard remains permanently public.
Do you know if offhand there'll be housing upstairs above the library?
There will be 171 units of affordable housing,
Great.
yes.
And then between the 5, the community land trusts, how many units of housing does that equal? Do we know?
Well, there are about
Most of our
I know
land
one of them
trusts.
is a farm. So of the four that aren't,
We have 1 unit of housing on ours.
there are about 220.
250?
There are
Some-
227 currently within the D&I portfolio.
And then 15 units on the Cohif Land Trust.
Most of our CLTs are very new. We don't own any housing yet. Yeah.
oh, very good. That's good. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
And just for context, Councillor, there are probably about over 300 community land trusts throughout the country.
So,
you asked
and I
about
also
numbers.
went in to look at the Community Land Trust Network, but it looks like some of that information's old.
Grounded Solutions is the site you want to go to.
Grounded
They
Solutions?
rebranded their
Okay.
name, and you should be able to get that information there.
Thank you.
And I just want to make one more note on the quantity of units. I know that 15 units, for example, on the COIF land trusts in the realm of affordable housing might not sound like much, but these were units that were, they were lender-owned, so owned by the banks under foreclosure, occupied by residents, and so a lot of the units that we've brought onto the land trusts are units that, other nonprofit developers and CDCs were, not interested in, or, it wasn't feasible for them to take on. And so that land trusts, it's not just about the quantity of affordable housing, but that we're also taking on and preserving units that are, really challenging.
Yeah, very, very low income.
Yep. Actually, if I could just ask one more question about, is there, you may not have it readily available now, but is there some analysis on the percentage of sort of level of affordability? And I imagine that it's generally on that lower end and very deeply affordable.
Yeah, so that information would be very easy to get to you. In COHIF, all of our residents are below 50% AMI, and some of our, and I would say, without having the numbers in front of me, a good percentage are 20% and below.
I had assumed that they'd be low, but it would be interesting to see as a percentage of all of the units where it lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi George. I know our other panel is waiting very, very patiently. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to keep my questioning brief. Tony, I was really interested when you were talking about lessons learned. You talked about having failures and successes. What are the kind of top lines of what we should know as we're looking to expand this throughout the city? And then particularly, as you mentioned, needing to educate banks as well and other lenders, what are the conversations that the city could be facilitating there? And anyone, feel free to jump in, obviously.
Some of the lessons learned for us were not having the appropriate people at the table. Initially, as community organizers and trying to run the land trust, there were times when you'd need legal counsel, the preparation of the proper legal documents. Underwriters from banks were turning down mortgages for first-time home buyers because these homes were on a land trust, and they were saying, what the heck is a community land trust? And so educating folks along the way was something that became really necessary. A few years ago, we had a bankers forum and invited multiple bank representatives into this forum to give them a CLT 101. After that session, since then, at Dudley, we've produced 6 different banks that have created a specific mortgage for community land trust potential home buyers, because now they understand, they're able to explain it to their underwriters, understanding what the ground lease is, which gets attached to the deed, where we continue to own the land, but the physical home belongs to the new homeowner. And so educating folks along the way is something that we discovered that wasn't being done enough. So those are some of the failures in educating folks, and again, having the right chess pieces on the board is crucial in this process. And so when I mentioned earlier that, partnering with folks like D&D along the years, and having the city backing us on this model, and having you folks at the table is crucial to the success of this. I mean, at the core, you've got the residents and you've got the community, but it isn't going to lift itself. It needs support.
Thank you. Anyone else, lessons learned or other tools or practices, best practices that the city should be thinking about?
Well, I guess one thing that I'll say is I want to highlight what is possible when we have true partners at the table. So as a very recent example, we've been working with D&D to acquire a homeownership property, our first actually, onto the land trust, and it was a case of many different moving parts, including trying to negotiate financing, creating new financial mechanisms in order to stabilize one family. So I guess one sort of best practice was having partners within D&D that were really committed to stabilizing families and being with the process over a very long period of time, number one. And two, because of that commitment, thinking very creatively and acting in very flexible ways to figure out what to do when one door seemed to close. And as a result of some very creative thinking and flexibility with our partners at D&D, we were able to stabilize this family and put this property on the land trust. And it was time intensive, but I think what happened was we created some muscle so that we'll be able to do this more at scale.
I just want to comment that we're still inventing, and that most of the literature is about housing on land trusts, which is different than farms, which are land trusts. And also, I think there's an interest in commercial spaces as land trusts. So there's a lot of invention that still needs to be done, and partnerships are good for that.
If I could piggyback on what Barbara just said, one of the really cool things about the community land trust model is that it initiated as this effort to create affordable housing, but as a result of what we've created in Dudley is the opportunity to not only create affordable housing opportunities, but healthy eating initiatives by growing locally, workforce development by training folks and hiring folks, right? And you've got small businesses that are buying the produce that's grown locally versus getting it shipped to them. So, you know, please don't think of the community land trust model as a solution to purely housing, but the ripple effect hits many perspectives. And we're fortunate in Dudley that, you know, we're hitting on the urban agricultural agenda, the housing agenda, we're dipping into the commercial agenda. And what's beautiful about it is that, you know, at the core of it, it's led by the community. So.
Thank you. Very powerful. I know Councillor Edwards has a few more questions. Oh, you're good? Councillor Baker, are you good?
Yeah, just were the land trusts originally, did they come to be for like saving forests and that sort of stuff? Was that how, like, where did it come from?
Just to distinguish that, I think you may be thinking about land preservation, which are conservation land trusts.
Conservation, okay, yeah.
However, the first community land trust was actually to save a farm, so it's a kind of gone full circle in that sense, but it different from just the pure purpose of conserving land. It's about building a community and having a functional organization out of that.
Okay, and also Sharon, just briefly, economic development, local economic development, you mentioned that. So that fits into, I'm assuming, kind of like what Tony had just talked about, farms. Like what would fit into the land trust model, like manufacturing, small manufacturing, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think community land trusts, as we've talked about, are not just about housing or affordable housing. They also hold commercial buildings, as Tony mentioned. There's a recently acquired building in Upham's Corner by the D&I Land Trust that's going to hold some commercial space as well. And in addition to that, can hold open space as well as urban farms as well. And I think the intention is also to use community land trusts as a tool to further community-defined needs. And so right now, housing is a pressing need, but I think local community economic development also fits into that as well.
Thank you.
If I could piggyback to that response, there's what you can fit in a community land trust model. It's bendable to many different things. If you want to check out Mondragon in Spain, they were able to create a workforce development opportunity where, you know, folks who lived there were workers in a manufacturing company. And so it's full cycle where they live on the site and they work on the site. And if you want to know about the origins of the Community Land Trust, there's a documentary called Arc of Justice. That'll get you extra warm and fuzzy on the topic if you want to see it.
Extra warm and fuzzy? Okay.
Extra warm and fuzzy. It's a great
Arc of
documentary, and it shows the origin of the Community Land Trust and what it really came out of, post-slavery and the impact it had on communities.
And what was the name in Spain?
Mondragon, M-O-N, dragon.
M-O-N Dragon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Thank you so much to our panel of advocates and leaders. We so appreciate your time. We're going to do the switchover, so if the administration panel, feel free to take your places. And as that change is happening, I'll invite down 3 people to testify. I know Wayne had mentioned there were 2 community members, so please come down. And then Wilson Ortega will be the 3rd.
Look at she's trying to sit far away from me, all right.
We've broken up.
Yeah.
Lydia, if you asked information, somebody asked for information. I should get it up.
...103號嘅住戶之前嗰時，我係受到逼遷，在逼遷嘅過程中呢，我就係受到好多嘅，即係有好多苦同埋好多困難。我哋喺外邊呢住咗成9個月，之後冇地方煮飯。咁啊，我哋一齊嘅呢就係有2戶人，101同埋103。咁我嗰度就係住咗15戶嘅人家。咁係新嘅即係我哋嗰度係賣咗一個新嘅故子。咁賣咗之後呢，咁佢就即係我哋受到逼遷啦。咁佢搬晒啲爐頭，即係冇地方煮飯。在無奈之下呢，咁15戶人都搬走。15戶人之中係有老人同埋啲細佬哥。即係我經歷咗呢個逼遷之後，即係我深有體會，即係唐人街而家嘅公用嘅地方呢就係好少嘅。咁即係如何我哋去保護呢個公共嘅地方能夠做到公用？咁啊，即係話最大嘅希望就得到市政府嘅支持。同埋允許，咁啊將呢啲公共嘅地方讓到公用，咁啊等我哋嘅社區嘅居民，即係有一個穩定同埋快樂嘅生活，安心工作，咁啊唔可以話再有一次我哋咁嘅流離失所嘅生活啦，重演喺個社區嗰度。
I'm going to be translating for Miss Yu. So my name is Paying Yu. I used to live at 103 Hudson Street with my sister. And at the time, we had a new landlord who actually purchased 101 Hudson Street and 103 Hudson Street. And the new landlord used many different ways to force us to leave, even taking away our stove. So there was a moment in time where I couldn't even cook in my own home. And after all of it, all 15 households in those 2 buildings, we were forced to leave. And within these households, there were many children and elderly. Looking back on this really tough eviction experience for me, I realized how important Chinatown is for people like me. And there are not many public pieces of land left in Chinatown. But I do hope and believe that the government will hear us when we say that we need public land to be used for public good so that we can stabilize people like myself, working class immigrant folks, so that we have safety, we have stability in our lives, and so that nobody else has to go through the same experience, eviction experience that I did. Thank you.
多謝。Okay. We had another resident who was on her way, but there was a family emergency, so I'm going to read and I'll hand in their testimonies later. So my name is Wan Hua Chen, and I'm a tenant of 22 to 30 Oxford Street in Chinatown. We are a total of 19 units with households made up of families, young children, and elderly. Some of us have lived there for more than 20 years. However, 2 years ago, our building was bought by a new landlord for a price valued higher than the market rate. Upon change in ownership, the new landlord immediately increased our rent without attention to our basic maintenance needs. As a result, we, the tenants, created a tenant association to negotiate with the landlord. To this day, the landlord has never agreed to our request for a long-term lease, so we feel like our future in Chinatown is unstable and uncertain. Our new landlord actually bought another building in Chinatown on 25 Harrison Avenue. This building originally housed more than 30 households. However, due to the unsafe conditions of the building, the residents moved away during the past few years. Now, our landlord intends to build a 26-story hotel at the 25 Harrison Avenue site. To be clear, the Chinatown community has no need for another hotel or luxury building. What Chinatown needs is affordable housing. We believe the surest way to guarantee that affordable housing will be prioritized and built in our community is for public land to be controlled and owned by the community. Only then can we ensure that resident voice and needs are centered and that public land is used for public good rather than for profit-driven development. Therefore, on behalf of the Oxford Street Tenant Association, I hope that the city government officials listen to our request to grant the highest form of community ownership and control to prevent the displacement of working class families like myself. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bao Lin Kwang. I am community organized, and you can see this all the tenants all living in Chinatown because some from the 86A in Harrison Street, they have 24 units, and all is the affordable housing right now. But right now seems all the Chinatown or the land increase right now. We hope city can do something, public land for public good, and then save our community and our Boston future. This is very important for all the tenants, even for the local family. Thank you.
Thank you. Wilson?
Buenas tardes. Yo soy organizador del movimiento Cosecha, el cual busca la protección permanente, dignidad y respeto de los 12 millones de inmigrantes indocumentados, sin contar las comunidades con estatus temporales como TPS y DACA, entre otros. Sabemos que nuestras comunidades con estos estatus migratorios están siendo atacadas por las políticas migratorias, los cuales no están siendo conscientes de que somos comunidades vulnerables al desarrollo económico que se está generando, y sabemos que esto es un estado, dicen que esto es un estado progresivo, y pensamos que un estado progresivo debe generar las alternativas suficientes y económicas para darle la oportunidad a esas personas que han contribuido al desarrollo de este país. En ese caso, conocemos nuestras comunidades en East Boston que están sufriendo el desplazamiento que hay ahorita porque hay como personas que ahorita en este momento pagan $1,200 o $1,500 al mes y que han venido pagando durante 5 años casi $300,000, los cuales representan casi el total de una casa. Entonces, son muchas estas las situaciones que están desplazando a nuestras comunidades y nos las están dejando sin una vida digna y con respeto y sin igualdad. Entonces, estamos pidiendo por más justicia en cuanto a la vivienda, porque somos comunidades que, a pesar de que somos vulnerables y no tenemos los mismos derechos educativos y sociales, somos comunidades que pues hemos trabajado y hemos contribuido a la economía de este país durante muchos años y merecemos ahorita en este momento que nos tengan en cuenta para continuar, que nos generen alternativas que nos permitan seguir estando en este país con dignidad y respeto.
Gracias.
So my name is Wilson Ortega. I'm an organizer with Cosecha. I'm here to demand that the 12 million undocumented immigrants in this country have a permanent solution to their status, along with those that have temporary status, such as TPS and DACA. We know that these communities are being attacked. We are conscious that we are vulnerable communities, and we are especially vulnerable because of all of the economic development that is happening. Massachusetts calls itself a progressive state, but a progressive state should give opportunities to those that contribute to the economy, like those of us in East Boston. A lot of us pay rents that are about $1,500 to $2,000. We've paid these rents over the course of many years, which amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars in rents, which is the total of a lot of houses. We demand respect and justice in terms of housing because of everything that we've contributed to the economy. We know that we're vulnerable. We're communities that have contributed to the economy, and because of this, we demand to be taken into account as all of this economic development is happening in our city.
Thank you, Ricardo. Great. I know it looks like there's some other folks interested in testifying. We're trying to take 3 and 3 and 3, so we'll move to the panel and then do public testimony after the panel. So sorry to be confusing, but thank you to our administration colleagues. Please feel free to introduce yourself and give a statement.
My name is Sheila Dillon, and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston. And I'll try to keep my remarks briefer than they were, just in the sake of time. But thank you for having this hearing. I do appreciate it. There were some questions put over earlier, and I'll try to get to those questions throughout these comments. So as you probably all know, one of D&D's roles is to oversee the interim management and disposition of the city's inventory of surplus and tax foreclosed property only. We don't own parks or schools or fire stations. It's our job to ensure that the property is well maintained while we have them, but to get them back into productive use as quickly as we can in a responsible way. Since January 1st of 2014, we've disposed of over 317 parcels of land, totaling over $2.5 million in square feet of land. We have another 466 units in the disposition process, and we have another 400 that we are researching. And the research, when I say researching, it sounds like an odd term for land, but it's the Grove in West Roxbury, which is a very complicated land mass with lots of easements and very, very narrow roadways, and some multiple parcels in Mattahunt where we've got wetlands and a lot of ledge. So of the land that we have conveyed, the majority has been used to create affordable housing, urban farms, community gardens, and we have put back a goodly amount to parks. We've given it back to parks because they were being used as parks. Over 1,000 units, 1,130 to be exact, housing units have been created on these parcels. And of those, 61% are affordable. And when I looked at that, I was like, wow, it seemed, I really felt like almost all had been affordable, but I think that the number is only at 61% because 2 of the dispositions, the RFPs went out in 2005 and 2007 or something, many, many years ago, about 10 years ago, but we just sold them after the recession. So that's why it seems a wee bit skewed, but the vast majority of land or public process that we have taken on after January 1 has been for affordable housing. There are some developments where a community will say, We would like to see a mix of incomes. We want to see some market rate component, and we do honor that when a community feels strongly about that. But like as I mentioned, not all of our land goes for affordable housing or housing. 21 parcels have been sold to create new farms under a new land trust, and 39 parcels were sold for other open space uses such as community gardens. So we do follow 30B, the state process, when we dispose of land. We are very careful about our community process. We go out to community meetings first and foremost. We tell them what we know about the land. We discuss the zoning. We spend some time on education. Then we get a lot of community input on what people want to see. However, if we go out and people say we don't want to see any affordable housing, we do have dialogue and we, reach compromises. Because not every community in Boston wants to see a lot of affordable housing. Most do these days, but not every. So we take comments into consideration about height and mass and use and first floors and parking, and we craft RFPs. And then typically, unless we've got a green light at the first or second meeting, we share the RFPs with the community, we get their input, we make edits as appropriate, and then when everybody is happy, we issue an RFP. We typically bring back all developers to the community to make presentations. That if the application didn't even meet the barest requirements, we don't. But any good proposal we bring back, we get community input, and then we make a decision, often very very much in lockstep with the community. Things sometimes go sideways, but by and large, it's kind of a tried and true process that I hold staff accountable to. So if I could speak a few minutes about land trusts. We love land trusts. I love land trusts. I've worked many, many years supporting land trusts. We do work with the COHIF Land Trust. We work with DSNI. We have a very long relationship with them. We're very excited about our new relationship with the Urban Farming Institute and their land trust. And I have DNI. We have created 233 units of new housing, or housing in the DNI Land Trust. We have also worked with the Housing iLab, has worked helping community land trusts put forth language that they would like to see in our RFPs around community involvement and community input, and that work is underway. So, in summary, I think we're doing right by Boston on our how we put out our properties. I think the vast majority is going for affordable housing and proper open space. I think we have a good dialogue and good relationship with many, many, many neighborhood groups throughout the city, and I really credit my staff for that. And we want to see more land go into the land trusts. I guess my only caution would be, and I'm kind of interested in this, and I just learned it today, COHIF is going to develop a citywide land trust, and that's interesting to me. My fear is that if we get, 10, 12, 15 land trusts, are they going to have the proper infrastructure? Because there is, money to collect and taxes to pay and maintenance, and there's an infrastructure to land trusts. So I do want to be a bit careful that while we think about land trusts, we make sure that they have the proper infrastructure to really be good stewards of the land. But that's something we can all work out together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, wait till it's done. I'm Devin Quirk. I'm Director of Real Estate at the BPDA. I want to thank you, Councillor Wu, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Presley, for calling this hearing. I also want to thank all the advocates who spoke on the previous panel for all of their leadership. I've worked with many of them for many years, and I really believe them to be true community advocates and who cared deeply about the future of their communities. And I should probably start by saying that this is my 4th day on the job as Director of Real Estate at the BPDA, so I'm very excited about this opportunity. I'm very excited about that Director Gold and Mayor Walsh have given it to me, and the opportunity to lead forward the BPDA's efforts and developing and managing their real estate, but I've got a lot to learn, and the topics we're discussing today are one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the job. I will certainly bring with me everything that Chief Dillon has taught me and the fantastic staff at D&D over the past 5 years. I should take this moment to say that Chief Dillon is certainly one of the hardest workers in city government and is often the compass for community development in our city, and that's something that I will bring with me to my new job. So much of what Sheila said is exactly the same approach that the BPDA takes in its development efforts, and D&D and the BPDA have built strong collaborative relationships over the past several years, and that's something I'm excited to continue in my new role. An example of the BPDA and D&D's community development partnership can be found in the land that the BPDA has transferred to D&D for affordable housing development during the Walsh administration. And this includes properties like Condor Street in East Boston, where D&D and NOAA are working to create affordable artist and rental housing on vacant BPDA-owned land that was transferred to D&D. The BPDA has also transferred more than 20 parcels in the Garrison Schroeder neighborhood to D&D, and based on community input, D&D is now developing them through Mayor Walsh's Neighborhood Homes program to create affordable homeownership opportunities for moderate and middle-income families. The BPDA has also worked with D&D in the Highland Park community, and a number of those parcels are being developed or being put out for RFP and yielding new affordable housing, open space, and energy-positive housing. And the list can keep going on. There's a lot of partnership that's happened over the past several years. But I thought it also might be helpful for me to include some overall stats on the BPDA's inventory as I'm coming up to speed here. There are just over 250 parcels in the BPDA's inventory, representing nearly 11 million square feet of land. Much of this land is either in the Charlestown Navy Yard or the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Industrial Park in South Boston. The rest are mostly scattered urban renewal properties across the city. In terms of what is available for disposition, there are less than 150 properties that are vacant and available. Many of these range from sliver properties that are only useful to abutters to signature properties that can be really influential development sites in the future. The rest of the property that isn't available is actively leased, and in some cases these could be leases that were signed decades ago in the Navy Yard or the Marine Industrial Park, while in other cases these are new leases for new developments that are taking shape in our city. And I had the team pull together some stats on our most recent leases for new development, ground leases for new development, and the data shows the power of public real estate for driving economic development and also public land for public good. And if you look at those new ground leases that have been recently signed, or those who are currently being negotiated or advertised under Mayor Walsh's tenure, it totals nearly 3.2 million square feet of new development, which will create over 4,000 new high-quality jobs in our city. So in closing, I want to say that I have a lot to learn about BPDA's real estate work, but I'm very committed to pursuing the community development and economic development opportunities that the BPDA's real estate inventory represents. And I'm looking forward to working with the council, the advocacy community, the community writ large, and my colleagues in the Walsh administration to do this in the very best way possible. So at this point, I want to turn over to Janet Carlson, who is one of the BPDA's most senior attorneys, and she's going to talk to you very briefly about property disposition under the urban renewal law. And she's going to focus on the community input and transparency aspects of this, which are really values that we hold close at heart, but also requirements under the law as well. So turn it over to Janet.
I don't know if I can get this started, but do you have a copy? I don't know if it'll come on now. Do you know which button? Nothing's. Do you know which? All right, my name is Janet Carlson. I'm with the legal department at the BPDA. And I'm going to talk about urban renewal because that's most of our property. And so this is the process that also takes into consideration what we just did during our extensions of the plans between the city council and the state. I've added in all the requirements there too. So going through this, let's see. It's not moving. Do you want to look at? Thank you. Okay. Okay, oops. Okay, so just briefly, I'm going to just show you where the urban renewal areas are and then go on to the disposition and show you where it comes from. Okay, so the urban renewal areas, we have 16 existing. We extended 14 of them recently about 2 years ago. You can see the areas in the next slide. These are the areas that still exist and actually the city council districts they're in. Okay. Some of these have very little property in them and some have more. Some have like just small properties. There are a couple large properties, but they all need work. Okay, so now this is our process. I'll go through this at a time. So the first thing when we look at urban renewal parcel, we have to look into the background of it. We have to look into the title. A lot of our properties have problems with title that we have to fix. Taxes might be owed, although I think we've paid all those off recently. We do a zoning analysis. We also have to look at the urban renewal plan and see what it says about that parcel, because that's what it says right now. We can amend that if that's decided the best course of action. The next thing we do is have community meetings to see what the community wants, like in what people were calling Parcel 12 is actually P12C in the South Cove Urban Renewal area, and there was a series of community meetings before we did an RFP on that property and put it out. The next thing we have to do is a disposition appraisal. That was required originally by HUD and now by the state. We then go to the board to authorize the issuance of a request for proposals. And if we've changed the uses or something has changed through the community process that we want to put on the property, we might have to do a minor modification to the urban renewal plan prior to going forward. Okay, then we do the request for proposals. They're advertised in newspaper, Central Register, on our website. We get the proposals in. They are reviewed by a BRA selection committee, and after it's decided which proposal, a lot of times we only get one proposal, but after it's decided which proposal, then we would go back to our board. They would adopt a resolution tentatively designating the redeveloper. As part of that resolution, it gives us authority to issue a license so that the proposed redeveloper can go on the site and do survey work and soil testing and all those preliminary things they have to do. We entered into that license next to let them do it. Then the developer has to work on their plans, their financing. Just so you know, from tentative to final designation, we can put whatever requirements we want, but the typical ones are equity financing they have to get their regular financing, they have to get their final working drawings and a construction schedule. We want to know that when we go to the final designation, enter into the proper documents for transfer, they start fairly quickly on the development. Okay, so then after that, after they have everything together and we're ready to move forward, as part of our extension last time, we agreed that we would give to DHCD the appraisal, the request for proposals, the tentative designation board memo, the proposed final designation board memo, and the proposed LDA and deed, land disposition agreement and deed that we transfer pursuant to. After, they have 30 days to review those. After that, we would go back to our board. The board would authorize the adoption of a resolution for finally granting the redeveloper the right to develop this property. And then after that, we actually close on the sale. We do a land disposition agreement, a deed, and we're required to do a Section 38 disclosure statement, and we use that in place of the original HUD disclosure statement that we used to do with all their renewal properties. Then they construct their project. They haven't finished with us yet. After construction, our architects go out and look at the construction, make sure that the property was constructed in accordance with our approval of the final working drawings. And then we go back to our board again to authorize the issuance of a certificate of completion. Okay, now the steps I've left out, there could be more steps going to the BRA board because I don't know what kind of project it was, so it could have large project Article 80, it could have small project Article 80, it could have a planned development area. All those would also be going to our board. And we try to coordinate the approvals so they might be combined with some of these board actions. Okay, the exemptions from this. The exemptions that we have are conveyance of non-buildable lots of less than 5,000 square feet. And we usually give those to the owners of the adjacent parcels if possible. And these parcels are not exempt from the urban renewal plan, so we have to go back and look at the uses in the urban renewal plan and make sure they're consistent. If we did a butters transfer, we would let all the abutters know and talk to them. Most of the time, it's difficult with the abutter parcels. The other transfers that are exempt are, of course, to the public agencies. We've given a number of properties to the City of Boston Parks Department. We have some more lined up to give them. We give properties, we go through PFC to give property to the Boston Public Schools, which we've done recently. We also make transfers sometimes to the MBTA. We also give some land to GSA for the federal government. Okay. And then these were just the requirements that came up in our extension. That's the city council requirements and the state requirements. So we've added those to it. So that's our process.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. So I'm going to just, I'll just go down the line with the questions that I have. So for Sheila, or Chief Dillon, excuse me. So, and I really appreciate this list. This is the current list of the 400 or 466 units?
300, it's,
317, sorry.
yeah, everything disposed of after 1/1/14.
1114.
If you want us to go
Yeah,
back, we can.
that's moved on, okay. And so, and I really appreciate you breaking down the units and how many, 61% have been affordable or towards affordable housing.
Yes.
But what I heard from a lot of the advocates was that is, they see that land trusts are a means to a goal, but they are so creative in that they really push for a certain level of community ownership permanently and stewardship. So I know that there are examples of that, with Eastie Farm right in the district. What other examples do you have a percentage of those units that have gone to permanent community ownership?
Yeah, so the vast majority on this list are not going into land trusts. And that's probably how I would define community ownership.
Okay.
A lot of them are going to nonprofits. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma. There is like I said earlier, I really do like community land trusts. I think they're good for lots of reasons. If it's home ownership, it does really help with foreclosure prevention.
Yeah.
It's a great way to keep the property affordable in perpetuity, and I think it builds community. So I'm for that. I think it's going to be important for the new land trusts, because we know when we're in DS&I area, we know that's our first stop. But it's going to be important for the new land trusts, I think, to establish relationships with the local developers and the local neighborhood groups and make those connections. Because if we go out and we're in Garrison Trotter, for instance, and this is hypothetical, but we're talking about new home ownership, we're not talking about home ownership and putting this into a land trust. So I think it's going to be important that we strengthen those partnerships. And if land trusts are very interested in the disposition of our land, that they're also at those meetings talking about the benefits of community-wide land trusts, because we're not going to insist to a community process they go to a particular land trust. So I think it's going to be important that the land trusts are out educating community groups as well.
So you had mentioned that the RFPs, that they do involve community feedback before you make them
Absolutely.
Public. One suggestion I would have, if it's not already done, is part of that community feedback and making it public, is if you could list the RFPs online, and then folks can directly, they can look up East Boston RFPs available or whatever. I could look that up and directly read it, and then also submit my comments that way as well, if I might make that as a streamlined possibility. And you guys, I know that DND has done a great job with the Metro list and kind of a pump out of, hey, this is what's available,
Right.
hey, this is what's available. So not to add to the list of things to do, if it's possible, hey, these are the RFPs available for January. And just to kind of, I can see the Land Trust Network being able to get on that, being able to organize, being able to read that. What that means is also people can translate the RFPs and make them readily available so that the feedback can come back from community members as well. So I push for online, I push for email, direct emails, so that folks can give that feedback.
I think that's a really good suggestion. We do put all of the RFPs online, but, and we blast out to our nonprofit and our for-profit developer network that sort of moves in our circles, but we should add the citywide land trust on there, so if they have an interest in having working with a developer or others that are kind of, yes,
Or feedback
we
for
should
the
do that.
RFP. And then I would say the same thing for the VPDAs also process. I don't know if it's online right now. They are.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would love to add that's just in the spirit of that is when we put out the Dudley Square properties for disposition, we had a community meeting where we had the RFPs with everyone. We did redlining of the RFPs, we put them online, say, give us your edits, and then we brought back at the next meeting a document of the RFP that was track changes, so you could see everything that
Wonderful.
we changed based on the community comments that we collected.
No, I appreciate that. That was just a suggestion. With the, I think it's stewardship requires structure, right? And I think that is what one of the things I'm hearing from you is terms of how do we assure that as we are giving away land, even to land trusts, that there's a structure there to assure the trust's longevity, right? And to make sure that that happens. It's a little different with CDCs. They have a different kind of relationship and, you know, their creativity. And we're still educating, as Tony indicated, there's so much education that even is necessary for financial institutions. But I'm really hopeful that the city will work with advocates, DSNI, the land trust, and possibly create a land trust boot camp wherein the conversation of what the city needs to see for permanent structure, what the land trust needs from the city, as Tony and Lydia mentioned, there are certain things the city needs to also be bringing to the table. And there's a conversation for those who are interested in forming a land trust that we're all at the table to begin with, right? That the city, land trust, financial institutions, so on and so forth, that there's a way in which you can set up either workshops, design them together, so that we are all on the same page, but then also move in a way so that if a group of my friends and whatnot want to form a land trust, we're just not off on our own or having different conversations with inconsistent ways. And we're talking to the leaders, talking to the city, and then hopefully in a way, possibly setting up a pipeline so that they are at the end to get some of this land that the city is disposing. And just another suggestion about a conversation and about how we can set up structure, education, that is also helpful. And then I wanted to dive deep a little bit, Sheila, into the receivership conversation that I know a lot of people didn't talk about this, but I'm gonna describe to you what I think is the current process, and I'd love for you to tell me how I am wrong or whatnot, and then also how we can make, I think, a more open process. So for those, I was reading recently that there is a process in which if there's a dilapidated building or property that's been abandoned in a neighborhood, that with the city's help, neighbors can organize and can begin to improve that property at their own cost. And ultimately, by going to court with the city's support, they can then have liens put on that property from their receipts that they have demonstrated that they put the work on that property. And I think this was actually, BFD tweeted something out about this, and Buddy and yourself were quoted in the article on receivership. And there's 61 properties, according to the two of you, in that pipeline. In any event, it allows for community stewardship for the community or entities. There's a small list of receivers, actually, that's been approved by the city, none of whom are community land trusts, for example. But there are some receivers that are approved to then allow for the liens to be put on, and ultimately you can foreclose on that property, and it's sold for that lien amount to the receiver or to somebody else, or possibly to the community. And I just think this is a way in which we're talking about dilapidated, abandoned properties coming back into the community with the city's support. And that process is not, one, very well known. Two, isn't as streamlined as it could be. It does require the city's support and the Attorney General's as well. So there's just some points of education, and this is just standing by and allowing. I have a house across the street from me that we know if someone leaves, we need to call the police. No one should be in that house. It's not safe. I did not know about this program. I would have organized my neighbors. We would have talked about this. We would have come through and tried to become receivers, registered, and to get this property. So I just want, if you could tell me what you know about it, or.
So I apologize, I don't know of, maybe it's using the same, and I'm not an attorney, but maybe it's using the same legal process, but it's the community groups that are actually getting, as they're becoming approved receivers through the courts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm only aware of, the city going to file at housing court and getting a receiver appointed, and then the receiver doing the rehab and the lien goes on the property.
Right.
I'm not aware of community groups actually becoming receivers. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's the problem, is that the city has a list of receivers, is helping them to get the liens on the property, and there's no reason why a community organization couldn't be one of those lists of receivers that the city is helping to get those liens on the property, if they're the ones helping to do all the improvements, and then ultimately be on the receiving end if that property is foreclosed on. That's community stepping up to take care of something.
Right.
why wouldn't we want that? So
this, this process is run out of inspectional services, but I'd be glad to, sit down with Ed Coburn and Commissioner Christopher and see what they think of the idea, or pull together a meeting to there are properties, even in this booming time, that are posing, they're nuisances or they're threats to the community. So I think we're all very invested in finding new ways that they are put back in good, productive use, and maybe even becoming long-term affordable housing opportunities.
So we'll continue the conversation, but I do know one area in which the city could be helpful. I believe in order to be a receiver on the list of these properties, you need to be approved by the housing court, and the city certainly could stand by certain organizations to be at least on the list to start to be part of that. That would be one immediate step.
Okay.
To Devin, for the BPDA, I wanted to talk a little bit about your leases. I'm going to talk granular in Charlestown, but then also in general your leasing policy and community involvement. So specifically in Charlestown, there is a lease that's coming up. Right now, that lease was entered into in the 70s with Massport. It's a strip of land along what we call Montego Bay.
Yeah.
And it's on Terminal Street, and it's used for cars right now.
Yep.
And met with the owner of that company. We've heard from all stakeholders, but this is really just how the leasing goes on. Now, this is in the 70s, so I can't really speak to what was the mindset of community process back then. It was leased to Massport for $1. Massport makes millions of dollars, I think specifically on here, hundreds of thousands on an annual basis. Okay, that's where we are. So you guys got a bad deal. And the question I have now, when you are coming up to redo this deal, how do I make sure, or how would any city councilor make sure that their constituents are getting also part of a good deal?
Yep, it's a great question. I'm definitely familiar with the property as a resident of Charlestown. I'm not so familiar with the property as it exists in the BPDA's inventory, but I think you're right. I think we need to get a much better deal, and I think what's really important is that that deal has public value, and that public value is very transparent. And so there's things I can certainly commit to as we start to renegotiate this. But I do know you dig into these things and you start to realize there's complications, right? In that particular property, I know that it's in a designated port area, so there are only specific uses that are applicable. So we have to take that into account when we're thinking about releasing the property.
Yes, and I think that's all great. And one of my asks would be, as the communication starts between you and not you, but at the BPDA and Massport, that there's some sort of transparency, or that community is allowed to be a part of that conversation.
Great. Yeah. That sounds eminently reasonable, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about it more as I dig into it.
Okay, thank you. So we have until June. Yeah. So I just want to let you know. And then in terms of the leasing, do you have a list of the leases that are coming up? Could you get me a list of those leases that are coming up?
That's something that I definitely want to take a look at. We haven't quite assembled it yet, but that's something that I'll be looking at in the course of the next couple of weeks, and I'd be glad to share it, yes.
And I would assume, I could be wrong, in terms of ownership of many of the properties that are, the 150 vacant available lots?
Available, yep.
Those are slivers, you said?
They range from everything from sliver lots to properties like the Blair lot in Dudley Square that is a very developable site that we've been doing community process on for the past 2 years. So that's the sort of ends of the spectrum.
Okay. And so is the goal of the BPDA to maintain that ownership? Would there be ever a part of a process to transfer that to public ownership?
So I would say that in general, the BPDA prefers to do land leases, and the reason for that, and there are many, but one of the important ones is that the public remains the landowner for the long term, so that 99 years from now, our grandchildren's children who are involved in government and community process in the future can think about the future of that site. So I'll give a good example from my experience at D&D where that's appropriate. In Dudley Square, where the city owns a property between a police station and a library, if we sold that property, which in general is the way that D&D has pursued redevelopment in the past, we'd lose the opportunity to think holistically about those 3 properties in the future. And 99 years from now, we may think very differently about Dudley Square and how those 3 publicly owned assets could be used together. So maintaining a degree of community ownership, I think, is and public ownership, rather, is a important aspect of land leases.
Yeah, and I think that that's, I'm really happy to hear that. And so in as much as there's a commitment to public ownership and the BPDA is quasi-public, right, or quasi-agency, there's hopefully still room for the table for other folks in the public to be there, right, with BPDA, really making sure that they have a consistent and strong voice as well. So, and the list of BPDA property that BPDA has, did you say that that's online?
It is online. I don't find it to be in the most accessible way right now, but we're working on improving that. So you can go to BPDA's website, and it's called the the BRA Owned Land Database, which has every single one of those properties, and we're thinking about ways to improve the accessibility of that information.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And then just on your slideshow, I had a couple quick questions. And one, I appreciate this. I think that orientation really helped to understand where we're going and where your focus is and why. Why Charlestown, why all these different areas. But specifically, I'm just a little bit confused. Urban renewal disposition process, that slide, it starts off with due diligence.
Yes.
So you're talking about the land that you currently have?
Yes.
So you still need to see who, like research the title on the land that the BPDA owns?
Yes.
Talk to me about
Okay, so sometimes assessing, well, first of all, I wasn't here when we acquired all the properties because we acquired them in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
And that was for how much?
Renewal.
Was it just a transfer? There was no.
No, we had to pay fair market value at the time. It was takings.
The BPDA paid fair market?
Yes, but remember, we had a federal government that was doing urban renewal and paid for part of it, and the city paid for part of it.
I see.
So, okay, so, yes, so getting back to the question. Okay, so those titles have been sitting with us. What I've been finding is that, like assessing, sometimes is right and sometimes is wrong. Recently, on one of our parcels that right now is a possibility of a development or a school, says BRA owns it, but when you do the title, the city owns 2/3 of it through their public works department, and 1/3 is the BRA. So what the BRA is doing is we are acquiring those parts, consolidating it into a site, and then I'm not sure what we're doing with it yet, but it may go public, it may go back to you.
This
site
due diligence
go
part.
back to the city is what it might do, yeah.
Okay.
There's some work on it.
Okay. And then on the item 12, closing of sale, land disposition agreement.
Yes.
I don't know if you have a sample of the land disposition
Yes, we do.
agreements with you, or?
I don't have it with me, but I can
okay.
bring it down because we have to give it to the state as well, so I've got a form.
In these, is this where you would put in the permanent affordability?
Yes, you can attach it to that, you can put it on separately, it depends what it is. So what happens is, it depends on the financing. If we're in with other agencies and they do the mass docs, we let our affordability go through the mass docs. But what I do is I attach the mass docs covenant to the land disposition documents, so it attaches to the transfer. So there's no question, it stays. But yes, this is where we could put it. And then do you want to explain what? Mass docs are documents we use that the state could be in them, all the agencies, D&D has a lot of money that goes in them, and the BRA. And what used to happen is everyone in the 80s used to put their own affordability on. It got very expensive for the developers of affordable housing. And so I don't even know who developed these documents, but they were developed and they write in all the requirements from all the different agencies into one set of documents. So it's easier and cheaper for the affordable housing developers.
Right. So when you mentioned in one of these that you sometimes transfer land to other city departments.
Yes.
And also to state and federal.
Yes.
I can understand within the city there's probably maybe very little cost, but when you transfer to state and to federal, do we charge, or what do you get for that? Fair market value?
So it depends on the agency, but most agencies at the state level have a requirement that they get fair market value. So
Yes.
it's often we've looked at opportunities to do land swaps in the past, where there's land that the city would be more beneficial for the city to own, and there's land that would be a great conservation area for DCR to own, and we, both agencies get fair market value based on the swap is often the way that this has been pursued.
The T does pay us, just so you know. They pay
The
us.
city does?
The T, the MEC,
Yeah,
not the city.
Okay, okay. And then finally, with regards to the, and I really appreciate the city council's role in this disposition, because I think that really helps us and where we could take leadership right away. I wanted to just ask you specifically, it's a little hard to read.
Yes, I can get copies
on
of
the
this. I
thing.
know, I can get copies for you.
But ultimately, I've understood the role has been, once it's been up for grabs, that we basically vote for its freeing up of land. Am I correct? When parcels of land come up to be available, we ultimately have to, it goes through Councillor Wu's committee. Is this, am I confusing the
Surplusing?
process?
Yep.
So
Okay.
if it's a city, if it's owned by a city department, a school, public works, police, and they say, we don't need this parcel or building anymore, we come before the city council and we say, with the department, and we say, we want to surplus this property. There's always good questions like, are you sure you don't need this school anymore? Are you sure this building is obsolete or whatever it is? And once the city council feels comfortable that it is no longer needed by the city, it's transferred to D&D, and then we start a community process.
And that's what, again, I guess getting granular again, we had with the North End, right? And the NIMPAC and the building that was, they were thinking about putting
That was
in-
owned by the school. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in
sorry.
that case, put back on my D&D hat for a
Okay,
second.
yeah, please.
In that case, the school committee voted to surplus the property. They realized
Yeah.
they no longer needed it, and the vote came before the city council to agree to surplus the property. And when that takes place, then it's owned by the public. It goes in the inventory of the Public
Right.
Facilities Commission, which D&D manages.
Right, but there was a standard that I was confused, or I was concerned about, that there's a certain stewardship or requirement that the city get the best offer and use for that land, as my understanding, maybe talking with some folks. And so, not to put any, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but if that's, to get the highest and best offer that you could. And so that's a real concern for nonprofits or me, when I was thinking about my constituents could never afford it then, because I feel in that case, a developer could always outbid us.
So we do get an appraisal on every property that we manage and we dispose of, but the vast majority are sold for less than that. But when we put out an RFP, we say to any potential applicants, if you are interested in getting this, development, and you are paying less than the appraised value, provide us a pro forma, provide us a financial analysis on why you can't why you can't pay the full market value. And we underwrite it very, very carefully. And so if someone's building affordable housing or it's a community garden and they can show that, that they show the numbers cannot support an acquisition price, then we go forward once we choose a developer, and we do not get full market value.
Okay.
We do put deed restrictions on to make sure that the concessions that we've given benefits the community for the long term. But we do not, we more than not don't
Right.
get full market
Because
value.
we're very excited about that community process specifically for this, and just, how we're getting notified about it. I'm getting asked about it, when is it going to start? When are we going to start talking about that? And those are, if you had the monthly RFP or something directly up there, it would be nice to be able to just point people to where they are. So I'm just suggesting that again.
I can check on that process
Please
too.
do.
Yes.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. I just have a few. So could you all talk a little bit about just making the decision between, for a city-owned parcel or BRA-owned parcel, sale versus long-term lease? Have we, in recent time, ever done a 99 or even slightly less than that year ground lease?
We typically sell property. We don't usually keep a long-term lease unless there's some, and like Devin mentioned, between a library and a police station, we're going to keep, just because there's so much city property there, it's prudent to do a long-term lease. But we typically sell property. And probably if it's affordable home ownership, it's easier. It's easier for folks to get financed and find banks that are interested in financing. And it just makes the real estate finance and the legal matters less complicated. but there is no reason you can't use long-term leases. Banks will recognize them. It just makes the deal a bit more complicated.
And then from the BPA perspective, we're different in this regard in that we typically do long-term land leases, and this is a distinction between what the typical BPDA property is versus the typical D&D property. Typical D&D property is often in neighborhoods and is of smaller size, and a typical BPDA property, although not all of them, are larger parcels that could have longer-term economic development ramifications, and keeping them as publicly owned gives that long-term, our children's children, opportunity to look at what the future of that property is.
What are the, I know D&D's done an exhaustive inventory, and I'm sure Devin, even though this is day 4, you already know the,
Yeah,
the
I'm excited.
BPRA inventory. So what are the major, largest parcels left under public ownership?
In the case of the BPDA, the major ones are the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Industrial Park and the Charlestown Navy Yard. Those are many of those parcels are long-term leased, but they are staying in the BPDA's inventory. In terms of other property that doesn't have a lease on it that is available, that's what I'm really digging into now. I know from the work that I've done in partnership with the BPDA in Dudley Square, there are 4 very significant properties in Dudley Square that we've conducted a 2-year process under Plan Dudley to think about the future, 2-year community process to think about the future of those properties, and are working towards putting out an RFP for those properties.
And about how many acres is that?
Off the top of my head,
Okay.
I don't know, but I can get that for you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think it's Dudley. We're working very closely with the Highland Park PRC. We own 200 parcels there, and so we're very active with the PRC about looking at land and land use and what should be open space and what should be development. We have parcels that we're going to start another round of conversations in Blue Hill Avenue, but a lot of what we have left is fairly small. And I think that's why D&D has provided funding to CDAC and LISC to provide money in a composite lending pool for acquisitions, because nonprofits really need money to acquire properties as they come online, because we are running out of city-owned land. So all of the thousands of affordable housing units that we've been able to develop with some ease, nothing's easy, but with some ease, that resource is coming to an end. So we do need to find new ways of getting property into affordable housing developers' hands.
When you say small parcels, Chief, what about how many?
5,000, 5, 6, 7,000 square feet.
Okay.
Maybe up to 10. 10,000 right now is sort of a large parcel for us. So yeah, there were a lot of this was they were residential sites during the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Houses burned. They came into our inventory, and now we've been working very hard to clean them up and get them out.
So the frontage road parcel is considered one of the larger ones?
Absolutely, and it's owned by Public Works. Yes.
Are there any others like that?
I don't have an inventory. So when I was talking about city-owned land, I'm just talking about the land that's in care and custody of D&D. Certainly there's schools own a lot of schools, and Public Works owns fairly sizable parcels. But I don't have an inventory of city-owned, but that does exist.
And I think it's worth mentioning that those agencies that are the operating agencies, they own a lot of real estate, and probably the majority of the city's real estate is in the hands of the Parks Department, the School Department, Public Works, and a few other agencies. And their boards and commissions are they make the decision to whether or not to proceed with surplus on those properties. We're sort of the ones responsible for carrying out that surplus, and BPDA has done that in some cases, and D&D has done that in some cases, but the initial decision of, do we need this anymore, sort of rests with that, the organization that owns that property.
Okay, so it's an interesting conversation about frontage road, because in this case, it's already before the council. We had our first hearing. Some of my colleagues are on the tour right now to see the tow lot and the facility that the city wants to surplus and hand over to the BRA, as the folks had said, it would follow. They're intending to follow a similar process as with Winthrop Square. But at what point would D&D or through the BRA get involved to talk about this public land for public use, public benefit, kind of restrictions around what might go into a potential disposition, whether it's a certain amount of affordability. Michael was talking about Tent City before and how many units were created there, and imagine with 18.5 acres, what the potential is, probably one of the few remaining spots for that much potential affordable housing or other type of civic benefit.
Yeah. I'm sure my colleagues at the BPDA are already involved in those conversations. I'm excited to get more involved, so I don't really know the details of that property yet. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I know that the thinking right now is because it is so large that if once it is surplused, it would eventually make its way to the BPDA for a public disposition and transfer, just because it's such a large parcel and it would involve a lot of planning.
Huge opportunity.
Okay. In terms of the lead time for disposition, what is the sort of average for these smaller parcels? What time frame does it happen within?
So it can, sometimes the stars align and you go out with a great, so oftentimes we do the design, especially if it's just going to be a single or a two-family or a three-family home. We go out, the community loves what we're talking about. It's going to be home ownership and affordable home ownership, and these are the designs, and they say, go forth. We've been looking at that forever. We want you to move this. And then it's probably on the street in 2 or 3 months once you go to advertising and get an RFP together. Sometimes at Highland Park, we've been out there for 3 years talking about, what the parcels should be, how much should be open space, who should own the open space. And so sometimes, processes can take, 3+ years. So it really varies on the complexity and the involvement from the, I'd say on average, once we start a process, we have an RFP out probably in 6 to 8 months.
And then we're very careful, both agencies, to not dispose of the property to the end owner developer until we're very confident that it will move forward. So we'll issue a tentative designation, and that allows the developer to move forward with assembling their financing. And in the case of a lot of developments that are affordable housing, they need to assemble a lot of different funding sources, including funding from the state and federal government. And so it may take several more years once that tentative designation is made before the actual property is finally conveyed and construction starts, but there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at that point.
That's very true, right? Right. When we designate, thank you, Deb, when we designate a developer, it means that they just now have the green light to go forth and spend money and start working with the various agencies. So you're absolutely right. It takes a long time.
And in terms of, I know you said each process is very dependent on what the community wants and is shaped by that conversation. Is there sort of a default set of, a floor or ceiling, or what you're thinking about in terms of affordability as you approach each project? And of the 61% that has come out in this administration that is affordable, about where does that fall along the percentage of AMI?
So we certainly listen. There's a lot of some communities that want a very, very, very low. We serve the poorest households. There are other communities that feel very, very strongly that there's a mix of incomes and some market rate. So it really varies. One thing that we have to be very cognizant of when we are hearing opinion is that we're educating and we're providing a feedback loop. It's very difficult for us to build affordable housing at a very, very low income unless we have available rental subsidies that we can attach to properties. Or we have to be very aware that the property will support no debt, and so therefore all of the development costs will need to be public subsidy and low-income housing tax credits. So it's a bit iterative. Communities will put forth what they want to see, and then staff and myself and others need to do financial underwriting and kind of, have ongoing community conversations. But there has been, in a lot of communities, there's a lot of interest in what affordability means, as you know and you hear. So we have been asking developers, and we've been putting into our funding rounds, that we want to see a range of incomes. We want to see more units at a much lower income than we have, historically produced with new affordable housing.
Got it. Great. That's all on my end. Janet, did you want to chime in anything? You're good. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I'm so sorry. I know there were folks who were still interested in testifying in the audience. So at this point, anybody who wishes, please come down. I don't have any more names on the sign-in sheet. And feel free to go to either of the podiums. Good afternoon.
Okay, my voice is loud enough. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Govan. I'm a member, leader of Reclaim Roxbury, and I'm also a lifelong resident of the Roxbury neighborhood. I feel that there is a way to actually upgrade the inner city regarding Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan without A, displacement of lifelong residents, B, disregard for communities that have been there, their voices to be heard, and what they've established, and D, disrespect of generations and communities of color. In my view, I feel that the developers are practicing predatory behavior as far as advertising and saying that there are public meetings and they're not openly advertising to the public to let people know what time, what venue you can come and voice your opinion. A lot of them is like very hush-hush, word of mouth, and I don't feel that that's fair. They are taking public land with no regards of the community, and I feel there are a couple examples of this predatory development and behavior with option 1 with parcel 3. Parcel 3 in Roxbury, there are 728 apartments in the pipeline and only 14% of them are affordable. Most of the affordable apartments are at 70% AMI and 80% AMI, and that is on public land. Option 2 with Plan Dudley, a third of the housing is market rate and a third is at 80% AMI. That means 2/3 is unaffordable to the majority of the people in Roxbury. And my third point, is to have an honest AMI. The city says that there are families that live in Roxbury, particularly Dudley Street, that makes $104,000 a year, but in reality is that on Dudley Street, families make close to $29,000 to $30,000 a year. When developers build on public land, they need to have betterment and growth of the community in mind. I feel both the developer and the community can profit, not just of new people coming in. Don't upgrade the community in a way that makes people feel like they can't stay here no more, or I've been here for years, now they're bringing it up and I'm not a part of that growth, I have to go. Give the community a chance to have their say. This is what should be built, have real community engagement. This should be affordable and low income, and this is how much we make. Development should at least try to meet the community standards and at least engage in the community and not just so much as just check off a box like, yeah, we had a meeting, we engaged, and basically nobody showed up because they didn't know that there was a meeting. What I think should be on public land, half of the affordable should be at 20 to 30% AMI, or that folks making $20,000 to $30,000 a year, and the other half should be affordable for folks making $35,000 to close to $50,000 a year. This should include people coming out of family shelters, homeless shelters, working certain state jobs that are just below $45,000. And I also feel that everybody can work together, local community organizations, BPDA, BRA, and we can all put our heads together to actually solve this, so that way long-time residents and long-time communities of color that have been in existence in the city of Boston doesn't have to be pushed out and feel like, okay, your time is up now. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
My name is Will Justice, and I ain't come up here with anything scripted. I feel as though we're being disrespected in our own neighborhoods. We're not even being asked about the black community, indigenous community. It's like you're bargaining with things that you don't even really own. It makes no sense to me to sit here and apply value to something that really in all actuality isn't yours. And it's like it needs to be turned back over to who really owns it, and that is the indigenous and black people who is already here. And speaking in the dealing and stuff like that, I don't see any of my people sitting at the table. Real deal. And I'm gonna say that with emphasis, because just because you look like me does not mean you representing my interest. And it's the truth. It's the truth. And we really need to have this open conversation of, you know, who are we really serving? Because it's like you're saying that the government serves the people. I don't feel served at all. I feel disrespected. I feel like I'm being criminalized in my own neighborhood because I can't even go down the street without being pulled over by people who don't look like me, asking me where I'm going in my own neighborhood as it is today. And then you're talking about bringing more people in here who have more money that are not even from here to sit here and scrutinize me further and to call more police on me. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's ridiculous, and I feel as though it's not fair. But as I see, the system's not broken. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's suppress our people. If you look at the flag, you literally have a native person being threatened with the sword, and I'm going to leave with that.
Thanks, Will. Hi, George.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is George Lee, and I'm an organizer in Eggleston with a group called Keep It 100 for real affordable housing and racial justice, and we collaborate a lot with Reclaim Roxbury and Dorchester Not For Sale and folks connected to a lot of the groups citywide. And a few thoughts on what the city is doing in terms of public land. One is to definitely support what folks in the Community Land Trust Network have been putting forth in terms of having priority for community control of land, so things like getting land into land trusts or other mechanisms for permanent community control, permanent affordability, and really maintaining standards that really connect to community standards or master plans so that it's not just an arbitrary decision on what's going on the public land. I think a couple elements to add to that. One is that there do need to be some strong citywide baselines in terms of what goes on public land. Otherwise, it ends up, what happens is certain neighborhoods that tend to be more affluent and white often don't want affordable housing in their neighborhoods or don't want, quote, those people, unquote, in their neighborhoods. And so, for example, if you look at what the BPDA did in South Boston on Planned Dorchester Avenue there, a lot of the extra units that they got in their plan there were at 100% AMI, you know, compared to in Plan JP Rocks where we fought to get more at 30 and 40 and 50% AMI. And what people from the BPDA and the city said was, well, you know, folks there wouldn't let us do less than 100% AMI. And that's not okay to allow some neighborhoods to get away with not doing their share of real affordable housing. That's why we need some strong citywide standards that apply to public land across the city. But then in locally in certain neighborhoods that are facing displacement, like Roxbury, Dorchester, Eggleston, Chinatown, and so forth, that those neighborhoods should be able to, you know, have even stronger standards than whatever the citywide plan is. You know, and one worry about that too is if you look at Plan Dudley, over the opposition of the community, the city pushed through to pass the standards for the first 4 RFPs in Plan Dudley, which include a lot of units at 50 and 80% AMI, and folks were saying that we need a lot more less than that. We need more at 30, we need more at 60% AMI. And that's again why it needs to be, the public land needs to be given out according to standards that the community actually decides and actually has a real vote on, and that actually, like Amanda was saying before, actually reflects the incomes in the neighborhood. To tie this into an announcement this week, so the mayor just released this draft update to the citywide housing plan, and at D&D's budget hearing earlier this year, I think Councillor Edwards, you had asked, are we going to be involved in that process of like deciding what the update is? And I'm not sure from your perspective if your office was involved or city council was involved, but from our perspective, you know, they shared it with this advisory committee, they asked for feedback within a few days, and there was no public process to talk about this jump from 53,000 to 69,000 units to talk about what should be affordable or not. And still only about 5% of all that new housing is marked for 30% AMI units, which is the folks who are in the most need. So I bring that up to say, one, to ask both of y'all and the rest of your colleagues on city council to hold administration accountable to come back to the table around that citywide housing plan to make sure there's a process that includes the city council and the public in deciding what needs to be in it, and specifically how public land fits into that housing plan. Because as folks said before, it's one of the few resources we have to really build 100% and deeply affordable housing. And so instead of just having 5% of units going to the folks who most need, how do we really set some standards on public land so we can get even more? As an example, in Seattle, for the priorities for publicly funded housing there, half of your affordable units need to be at 30% AMI, half at 40%, and half at 30, a quarter at 40, and a quarter at 60% AMI. That's leaps and bounds above what is required here in the city. And so I think if we work at it, we can really come up with stronger standards like that that actually meet the needs of the community instead of gentrifying folks and pushing them out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just address? Sure. Just to address one of your comments about the city process and communication about the city plan. So I got a heads up, that's it. about the updated plan, but we fully intend, the committee that I host and run, will be holding an update on that speculation, a working session specifically on a series of working sessions on speculation. Now that we have data from the, I think it's Chuck Collins's report, we have additional data from the city and its updated plan. So to come back and to discuss how these plans and how they do or don't work for the folks in Boston is, we're planning on having a series of working sessions specifically on that. So the conversation isn't over, is what I'm trying to say, and I want to thank you for bringing that up.
On the speculation piece or on the general plan and goals as well?
Well, I think that they're deeply connected. Housing in general is
Yeah.
in that plan. It's a Housing 2.0 plan. So the speculation conversation and how that plan does or doesn't address the concerns that we voiced in that long hearing is what a lot of the working sessions will be talking about.
Okay, thanks. And now I would suggest if needed to add more working sessions or hearings, if there's other goals in that plan that need to be vetted also by the city council.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to share some thoughts? Okay, I'm seeing no takers. Any final thoughts from you, Councillor Edwards?
No, thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being part of this and for a great starting point for a conversation. This concludes docket number 0818, Land Disposition and Stewardship, held by the public hearing held by the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. This hearing is adjourned.